Well, welcome everyone. I'm Councillor Chris Atwell, Chair of the Planning Committee. Limited public seating has been made available. However, this meeting is also being webcast to allow the public to attend remotely if they so wish. The public seating area is not in view of the camera used to webcast this meeting. If the continuous fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the room and public gallery by the stairwells. Do not attempt to use the lifts. Please assemble in the turning circle at the end of King Henry Street past the University's Park building. In order to comply with the Guildhall Trust's fire marshal regulations, anyone who signed in at the Guildhall reception desk should sign out when leaving the building at the end of today's meeting. May I draw everyone's attention to the fact this meeting will be live streamed and everyone speaking via a microphone will be on camera, including those making deputations. Members of the press and public are also permitted to record the meeting on the understanding that it neither disrupts the meeting nor records those stating explicitly they do not wish to be recorded. Please can everyone use the microphones and remember to switch them off when they are finished, otherwise the camera will remain on you. If there is any voting today, please can members keep their hands raised clearly until the number of votes have been stated. Okay, let's make some introductions. Should we start with the committee and the Vice Chair?
Judith Smythe, Vice Chair of the Planning Committee.
Thank you, Judith.
Symes, Councillor for Eastern and Crane.
Thank you, Linda.
Morning, Chair. John Smith, Eastern and Craneswater.
Thank you, John.
Russell Simpson, Hillsey Ward.
Thank you, Russell.
Dave Ashmore, Councillor for Fratton Ward.
Thank you, Dave.
Ian Holder, Councillor for St Thomas Ward.
Thanks, Ian.
George Fielding, Councillor for Central South Sea Ward.
Thank you, George.
Hugh Mason, Councillor for St Jude Ward.
Thank you, Hugh.
Robert New, Councillor for Cobner Ward.
Thank you, Robert. Okay, and officers?
Thank you. Ian Maguire, Assistant Director for Planning and Economic Growth.
Thank you, Ian.
Karen Martin, Democratic Services.
Thank you, Karen.
Good morning, I'm Kieran Laven, I'm one of the Council's planning solicitors.
And thank you, Kieran. And if people giving deputations could introduce themselves, if we start over on the right of me. If you could just introduce yourself. If you could use your microphone just so we can all hear who you are.
Sean Adams from National and Regional Property Group.
Thank you. Oh, you're sharing a mic.
Yeah, I can move over there when I speak later on. Tom Molyneux-Wright from DPP Planning Consultants.
Thank you.
Councillor Kimberly Barrett from Milton Ward.
Councillor Darren Sanders, representing the Milton part of Baffins Ward.
Thank you, Darren.
Councillor Steve Pitt, Milton Ward.
Steve.
Rod Bailey from the Milton Neighbourhood Forum, Planning Forum.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. Would you mind doing it again, just a bit closer to the microphone so we can...
Peter Kenniston, 29 Firgrove Crescent.
Thank you.
I'm Simon Hill. I'm here on behalf of the owners of 55 Bedhampton Road.
Thank you.
Gerald Allen Jackson, Milton Ward.
Thank you very much. Apologies for absence, Karen? No apologies. Minutes of the previous meeting. Pages 5 to 16 of the pack of the meeting held on the 30th of November. The members content that they're an accurate record. Okay, I shall sign those in due course. Any declarations of interest, members, before we get into today's substantive business?
Not an interest, Chair, but as communicated to you earlier on, I have to leave the meeting by about 2 o'clock.
Thank you.
Same here, Chair. I need to leave the meeting by about 12:30, 1ish.
Okay, thank you very much.
Excuse me, Chris. Me too. 1 o'clock.
Okay, we'll do our best to make some progress before then. Okay, thank you. Okay, to today's business. St James's. Ian, over to you.
Thank you, Chairman. St James Hospital. A little bit of procedure before we get into any substance. So this is a application subject to a current appeal for non-determination. The committee last looked at this in January of this year, where they deferred it from their consideration for 4 reasons. I'll come on to those in a second. Following that deferral, the applicant appealed for non-determination to the Planning Inspectorate, so the determination of this development proposal now vests with the Planning Inspectorate rather than Portsmouth City Council. That appeal was progressing to a public inquiry this year, and consequently officers engaged with a ward member to discuss whether any reasons for refusal should be defended by the council, and that settled on a single two linked reasons for refusal, being the concerns of the unmitigated impact on the adjacent Milton Common or Solent Way to Brent Geese sites that are there or thereabouts, which was a concern raised by Natural England, I think actually on the day of the January committee. Work is ongoing with the Parks team and the appellant to identify an updated mitigation strategy to resolve that reason of concern for the council. But at this time, and at that time when a case management conference was undertaken earlier this year with the Planning Inspectorate, it remained an unresolved harm associated with the development justifying refusal in the opinion of officers, in the opinion of Portsmouth City Council. Because there's a substantive cost associated with the mitigation that is likely to come out of the updated Milton Common management framework, the mitigation strategy, officers also felt that there was insufficient evidence at that time to confirm that the zero provision of affordable housing, which the applicant was arguing on a viability basis, was proven, as the cost of mitigation wasn't known. So the linked reasons for refusal currently being defended by officers to this upcoming inquiry is unmitigated impact on Solent Way to Brent Geese and unproven reduction in affordable housing, contrary to policy, as there is an inadequate viability appraisal. We went into the conference, the case management conferences, with those bases, supported by ward members and by the Milton Neighbourhood Forum, who attended as interested persons, potentially all six parties, but third parties basically, who may have had additional comments and concerns linked to the reasons for deferral or indeed other matters, which, as I say, I will come on to. At that case management conference, the appellant identified that they had submitted a series of updated and amended drawings, which is true, and while the council did undertake consultation on some of those drawings back in February post the deferral, they obviously had all been updated again and submitted along with the appeal. The appellant therefore requested of Planning Inspectorate to ask us to do a further public consultation. The Planning Inspectorate agreed and instructed us to undertake that consultation, which was undertaken earlier this year. So since the making of the appeal for non-determination, we actually have a series. There's no major changes, I must stress. We can look at what they actually are as we go forward. But there are a series of amended drawings and combined drawings to update the proposal that is now in front of the Inspectorate. As the appellant requested that additional consultation and the Inspectorate instructed us to undertake it, officers are satisfied that it is reasonable to bring this matter back to committee, so following your deferral to review your position on the application. Clearly, the appellant may have a different view and may feel that adding concerns now, should this committee resolve to do so in today's meeting, is an unreasonable behaviour at this late juncture. Officers are satisfied that it is not in principle unreasonable to have this debate now in December, when the appeal is now scheduled to be heard by public inquiry in April, when we are indeed responding to the public investigate the public consultation that the appellant and the Inspectorate between them required us to undertake. Clearly, we'll find out whether that is a reasonable position to take or not, should the appellant seek costs from the council in due course. But overall, officers are satisfied on my advice that this is a reasonable thing to allow this committee to come to a determination as to whether, in addition to the outstanding habitats and viability issue, which remain unresolved at this time, so the committee is not in a position to comment on because you've got nothing to see, unfortunately, whether the other matters associated with the application, the other key determinations, key principles as laid out in 1.2 of the report, are something that the council should be adding to a recommendation to the Planning Inspectorate. The Plan Permission should be withheld at this time. That's the procedure today. What you're being asked to do is a resolution as to what the council would have determined. You say you're not determining the application. That power now vests with the Planning Inspectorate, but this committee can obviously come to that conclusion. As members are, I'm sure, aware, this is a long-running application with significant local concerns and significant local comments. Consequently, we have a number of substitutions today where I do know ward members have made very clear their position in the past, and consequently they're here making deputations. So for those watching the live stream, to make those distinctions, we have a number of members, either full-time members of the planning committee or substitutes, and a number, I think we have 4 members, yes we do have 4 members, making deputations as ward members, as they're not part of the voting part of the committee. I think that probably covers the key procedural matters. Just to highlight to members, there is a SMAT input to this item, a couple of clarifications to the report and a couple of later letters, one from the forum, one from Stephen Morgan MP, that was submitted post the publication of the committee agenda. To look, therefore, at the key matters in front of the committee. So St James's Hospital, a listed hospital building with a number of associated buildings, many of which are heritage assets in their own right, or as part of the curtilage of this listed hospital. A significant amount of demolition of parts of the building, modern annexes and other parts of the building, to clear the site to enable development. Just a high level there, as you can see, of a series of terraces, detached and semi-detached buildings around the hospital, and the conversion of the hospital itself into flats. As I said, 12th of January, the committee looked at this item last, and deferred it to look at 4 things. These were a summary of those 4 things. Revisit the affordable housing provision. As I say, this committee doesn't really have much of an opportunity to do that today. There will be a new viability appraisal once the new cost of mitigation is known, submitted. I anticipate around February, March of next year, and officers will obviously evaluate that to see whether it is justifying a reduction in the affordable housing provision. I must stress there's a significant amount of existing vacant building on the site already, so the total affordable housing provision required by policy for this site is only 17 dwellings, but even so the appellant is intending to put forward evidence that they can't provide even those 17. So obviously a concern, but one officers will pick up once that updated evidence is provided. The other 3 matters are entirely available for members to comment on today, as they did then. The design of the new build housing elements, the retention and replacement of mature trees, and the highway implications of the scheme. Obviously, any other matter, as I say, we've listed out all the key planning considerations in paragraph 1.2, is also open to the committee to comment on. To look, however, at those specific points. So, as I said, obviously it's the conversion of the existing listed hospital, a very imposing and impressive building, so some minor alterations to that, as you can see, as well as the significant demolition to put in new windows, doors, openings, and obviously internal alterations. The conversion to provide a series of flats and homes, 151 flats in the conversion, an additional 58 new dwellings. One of the reasons for refusal, highways. The appellant has put forward a transport assessment that's been looked at carefully. It benchmarks on a reasonable assumption of past usage. Obviously, the current usage was very high when it was a COVID vaccination centre, but is currently very low, neither of which are a good basis to judge the net increase in vehicle movements. So consequently, through negotiation, officers of the planning and highway authorities have put a benchmark in, which is roughly a 2014 occupancy, which leads to a small amount of additional vehicular movements, and that small amount of additional vehicular movements in those peak hours does justify requiring an off-site highway provision for some junction improvements. One you can see here, and the other just a small improvement to crossings on Loxway Road as well, with those 2 highway improvements which will be secured through Section 106 agreement, or at least recommended that the planning inspector secures through Section 106 agreement. There are no concerns raised by your technical advisors in the highway department. That's just an illustration of the new build homes, so probably not much more to say on that, but and that's an open space point, which I'll come back to in a second, if I may. Apologies. So the next reason for deferral was trees. Since the previous January consideration, 10 more trees are being retained than previously was suggested. So there's 145 trees on site. Previously, around 57 were being removed or substantially reduced. Now 40 are being fully removed, 18 in category B, 22 in category C, and 7 are being substantially reduced. With the breakdown you can see there. So with those 47 trees removed or reduced, 150 new trees would be planted, which is a range of different sizes from semi-mature trees down to whips. As you can see, the existing collection of trees is a mixture of sizes, both in groups and individual trees, as identified through the tree assessment, which is the summarisation in this table. To probably then go to the design question, so the impact on the heritage buildings. Concern has been raised and was raised by the committee back in January on the more modern flat roof design of the surrounding buildings. You can see an illustration of them there. Consequently, the appellant put forward an alternative design, effectively putting pitch roofs on top of these existing dwellings, and consultation was undertaken on that earlier this year. And then obviously further consultation undertaken, as I say, this autumn. Neither the flat roof nor the pitch roof design has appeared to be attractive to consultee responses, so to local people and other comments. Both have been felt to be harmful to the setting by local people, and the appellant has consequently gone back to the original design, the flat roof design you see in the illustration here, that the committee looked at back in January. As a probably less helpful visualisation there. To take us back to open space, so not a reason for deferral, but we do know a matter of local concern. Specifically, one area I would highlight for members is this area of land south of the internal access road and north of the public open space. This area is and was designated open space under PCS 13 and now under the Milton Neighbourhood Plan, which now forms part of, since the 11th of October, your development plan. They are building 3 dwellings and parking spaces in that designated open space. So overall, there is a loss of designated open space in this scheme, as detailed in the report. The rest of the site, the bits north of that east-west road there, is obviously has a mixture of hard standings, green spaces, trees and buildings, but is not designated open space. There is a disagreement between the appellant and the Milton Neighbourhood Forum as to the size of existing open spaces. So none of them are designated in this north of that road, but the size of open spaces, which obviously leads to some disagreement whether there is a net gain or loss of open space within that white land. As I say, they're not designated open spaces, so there's only so much weight one needs to give to such considerations in those matters. But certainly it is the appellant's contention, which officers are unable to disagree with, that there is a net gain in public green spaces, whereas the Milton Forum are of the opinion that there's a net loss. We're talking plus or minus about 4,000 square metres over the 40 to 45,000 square metres where these disagreements lie. This is simply because there are areas which the appellant have described as not being open spaces because they've been previously built on or are contained behind fences, for example, which obviously the Milton Forum disagree with. So there doesn't appear to be a resolution to that disagreement. However, to comment on from officers' point of view, this land is currently private land, NHS land, and while public access has occurred in the past, the landowner has taken steps that have been confirmed and checked to close the land to public access on a regular basis to prevent the establishment of a right-of-way or a village green or other similar designations. The appellant has offered to the Inspectorate through the appeal a public access agreement to be secured through Section 106 agreement. So the current white land, which is not designated open space, but is obviously by the dictionary definition open space, would be qualitatively improved by providing a right of access secured through 106 that doesn't exist at the moment, albeit some access to the site when it was an NHS hospital was of course in existence. Overall, therefore, in terms of open space, there remains a disagreement between the Milton Neighbourhood Forum and the appellant as to exactly whether quantitatively there is slightly more open space or less open space, it depends how you define it, is part of this scheme. But qualitatively, officers are satisfied that there is a substantive improvement because while members of the public have access to the site, certainly when it was an NHS hospital, they will actually have the right to do so as of right, a specifically defined right in the Section 106, which is a notable improvement compared to the past situation. The other matters as raised, trees, design, highways. As I say, the Highway Authority are satisfied that with the junction improvements as described, that there is no reason to withhold planning permission on highways grounds because there is a net increase in the number of trees, though obviously a reduction in the maturity, 47 out, which are there and have a range of maturity, some of which are quite mature, 150 going in, certainly they won't have the same degree of maturity, but officers are satisfied that as part of the normal renewal and landscaping, that is good practice for arboriculture and landscaping, and there isn't a reason to withhold plan permission on that basis. In respect of the setting and design issues, planning officers, your conservation advisor and Historic England have raised no objection to these matters. Quite clearly, there are homes going in and around the listed building and thus impacting on its setting. These are not considered to result in material harm to warrant refusal in the professional opinion of officers. That is a judgment, obviously, that this committee will have to make as well. I think that probably covers the key issues. The rest of the matters, as described in the report, I think are relatively self-explanatory, but obviously very happy to answer any questions that members have.
Thank you very much. We have some deputations on the application. Mr. Bailey, you have 6 minutes to give your deputation.
Can Councillor Steve Pitt pass a couple of images around to members, please? I've given one to you and one to Ian.
Yep.
I had sent the case officer, Michael Cassidy, copies of the deputations that I've sent to you all. What I want to get to is the fact that when we had the January committee, that didn't approve the application at all. The committee wasn't satisfied that it was acceptable. Rather, it gave the opportunity to the applicant to revise his scheme. So what I want to be clear is we are able to here refuse the application on more than just the grounds of viability and habitat harm. You see what I'm saying is we didn't endorse, we're not going back on what we had back in January, and there are reasons that we should refuse. The highway matter hasn't been resolved. There's an image that you have of the traffic queue from the roundabout to the end of Loxway Road to the junction with Goldsmith Avenue. In his report to officers, Peter Haywood says there's something like the ability to accommodate about 20 vehicles. If you look at that, there's only 9. And then what we said back in January was that we doubted that the traffic light system could work because there'd be no space for us to go into. That issue's not resolved. That scheme was not resolved in January and it isn't resolved now. Getting back to the open space wasn't discussed at the January committee because the members were advised there was a 60% increase in open space. Well, we know there isn't, and I'm grateful that we now know it's been confirmed by Ian that that's not so. Designated open space, the point about having a core policy in the Portsmouth plan, and it's also, as Ian says, in our neighbourhood plan, is the fact that we have gross deficits. We're talking about over 60% deficits, so that means you've only got 40% by national standards of the open space you need in a city of this scale and population. So therefore, it is a fundamental issue. We can talk about the setting. We've got a different view about the setting around the hospital as well. But there's a clear loss in open space, and we've tried to make that clear, and we did to the inspectorate. So we've got unresolved issues that this committee today could turn around and say, no, I'm not happy with it as it stands. Getting back to the amendments, we have, going across the northeastern airing court, we've got 9 3-storey buildings. When the committee looked at it in January, there were 7 3-storey buildings. You've got a pair of 3-storey buildings right next to Overton. That just compounds the damage to the setting. That's a significant change. The point about the open space around the hospital is essential to the setting. And Historic England guidance, and even Louise Forsyth in her letter to the planning officers in 5th of February last year, actually said, look, you've got to be clear. There are clear public benefits in losing this or damaging this curtilage, this airing core area, this setting. We haven't done it, have you? Because if you look at the amount of buildings that are lost on the site that have been cleared, Lancashire House, the buildings to the north side, and then you add back in the ones that are the ones at the front as well, and you add back in, there is still a loss. But that loss, that open space, you've got to appreciate historic buildings in their setting. And the other thing about all this, we're talking about why have we got to this state? Why is there so many houses on the site? And I think it's because the NHS have mishandled their disposal. That's not for us to decide, but it is for us to think, well, actually, we don't want to suffer the consequences of that. I mean, don't forget, we're a community here that have bothered to do a neighbourhood plan. You've got hundreds of objections, and we've got to live with the consequences of this development, and it's not proved at all. And we will be going to the appeal, and we've got the evidence. We will be, defending it. But it'd be really helpful if this committee could actually have a serious think about what was proposed to them back in January, because you didn't, and you can't really, in our view, accept it. There's a lot wrong with this. We do think that the applicant has done a good job on the conversion, but what's going on around is harming the setting of the listed building. Don't forget, in our neighbourhood plan, we had an examiner who expressly put in her report the land to the north of the chapel, which is also great too, against the request of the NHS. She said, no, that's got to be left clear, because that's important to the setting of the chapel and the other buildings. And the other buildings, for the avoidance of doubt, aren't just the hospital. They're the Edwardian villas to the north. You can have a view at the minute, right across the airing courts from the south and from the chapel to those two villas. That's Falcon House and Bay Trees. They're part of the setting of this hospital. They will be harmed. I'll rest my case. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bailey. We have a number of deputations from councillors. I think I'll do it now for best order. So I think Councillor Barrett, if you'd like to, you have unlimited time, but please don't.
Don't worry. Thank you, Chair. Committee members, once again, I'm here before you today to ask you to refuse the planning permission in regards to this application today. Looking at the issues we are facing as a city, especially when we look at climate change, preserving our green spaces and encouraging biodiversity, I refer you back to PCS 13, A Greener Portsmouth. It sets out the way in which green infrastructure should be protected and enhanced through collaboration with developers, but it also suggests refusing planning permission for proposals which would result in the net loss of existing open spaces. That is happening here, particularly with the loss of the land known as Matron's Garden to the south of the chapel. At the last planning committee, the officer's recommendation did not include the note from Barton Wilmore, which clearly states that there would be a net loss of open space. Instead, the officer's report told members that the scheme would deliver around a 60% increase in the amount of open space provided on the site. This note was not made public until fairly recently and was also not provided to you, the members, at the last committee, so therefore you did not have the correct information in front of you at the time when this was last discussed. In line with the city vision, Portsmouth wants and really does need to be a green city. In the newly adopted climate strategy document as well, section 3.2.5 talks about the natural environment and the need for green infrastructure in the city, as well as increasing the amount of open space and greenery. All members here have made a clear commitment in 2019 at full council in regards to the climate emergency, and several times since then, to tackle climate change and to increase the greenery and biodiversity to ensure that we safeguard this city and its residents into the future. Therefore, we should be making that point clear and making a stand to make sure we do not lose any precious open space to development, especially when it results in a net loss for our residents. PCS 13 is a key policy to make sure that new development does not impact on quality of life or quality of natural environment. Access to open space is beneficial, as we know, for both mental and physical health, so we must keep it available wherever possible. It's also important, I feel, to point out that PCS 13 is not a policy for publicly designated open space, it is for open space. Net loss of open space is a clear breach of PCS 13 and the Portsmouth Plan, and therefore should mean this application should be refused. Planning permission to construct a fence to the north of the chapel in 2015 was refused, and in April 2016 a different application was submitted to construct a 2-metre high fence to section off land to the south-east of the hospital. The reason for refusal was as follows, and this was sent to Homes, what is now Homes England. The proposed fencing would, in terms of its appearance and extent, be considered to adversely affect the settings of the listed buildings and the relationship to the historic character of the site, giving rise to less than substantial harm to the significance of the heritage assets. In the absence of public benefit to outweigh that loss of significance, the proposed fencing would therefore be contrary to the objectives of Chapter 12 of National Policy Framework and Policy PCS 23 of the Portsmouth Plan. Section 66 of the Listed Buildings and Conservation Areas Act 1990 places a duty on the local planning authority to have special regard to the desirability of preserving a listed building or its setting or any features of special architectural or historic interest which it possesses. The proposal is located within the curtilage of a listed building. Therefore, it is important to consider whether the proposal would affect the setting of the listed building. Matron's Garden is less than 100 metres away from where that fencing was refused. The proposed housing would also be higher than 2 metres tall and closer to the road than the proposed fencing that was thrown out. Therefore, this is in breach of PCS 23 and the application should be refused. There will be a loss of trees to the site, and as you've seen, they have been categorised into A, B and C trees. 57 proposed to be felled, but now that's down to 47. The committee need to know, and I think understand, the lifespan of these trees though. Category A trees tend to have a lifespan of around 40 plus years. Category B have a lifespan of 20 to 40 years, and Category C have a lifespan of 10 to 20 years. These are mature trees protected by TPOs that this council has put in. As a committee, also, you deferred your decision on this application for a number of reasons, but one of those was because you were unconvinced when it came to the proposed signalised junctions on Milton Road, which has also been echoed by Milton residents. However, I will also ask committee members to pause to think about the residents of Moorings Way. Apart from the suggestion of advancing a stop line in Moorings Way, which would cause issues if buses cannot come round from the Eastern Road, Moorings Way is also too narrow for vehicles to pass each other near to the junction, and therefore additional queuing would not be able to be accommodated. We know that back in 2014, this neighbourhood forum undertook a survey under their own steam, which proved that these junctions and others in the area were already at or above capacity at that time in 2014. Since then, development has occurred to the northeast of the site and elsewhere nearby in the city, so pressure on these junctions surely could not have improved, but in fact probably and more than likely to have got worse. We know that car ownership in the city has gone up and that car movements on the Eastern Road are also much higher after lockdown compared to pre-COVID times. The existing infrastructure cannot cope already, so why add to the issue and make lives miserable for those who already live to the north, to the south, to the east, to the west of the proposed application? An increase in poor air quality with queuing that would inevitably happen is in contradiction to all the work we as a council are doing to make sure that our residents live happy, healthy lives, not breathing in the toxic fumes. Policy MT4 states that the retention and reuse of the main hospital building will be permitted, providing that the surrounding highway network can satisfactorily accommodate the additional traffic generation. This is not the case, and it has already been proven by this forum back in 2014. Therefore, there have been no changes since this was last discussed by you all in January. This is therefore in contradiction to MT4, and on that basis, I also believe this application should be refused. You'll hear from various deputations today how that we have sat down and identified that the development is not sustainable or compliant with both the council's policies as well as the newly adopted the Milton Neighbourhood Plans policies. Nothing much has really changed since we all stood in front of you back in January, and therefore I ask that you refuse this application today.
Thank you. Okay, Councillor Pitt.
Thank you, Chair. I've actually got copies of my deputation that I'd like circulated to committee members. Is that okay? Councillor Barrett will assist. Thank you very much. Chair, members, as I'm sure you're aware, this is an extremely complex planning application. There is a long history, and since this process started, the case officer has changed multiple times, and Portsmouth City Council has had at least 3 heads of planning. So I'd like to go back to first principles. When NHS Property decided to dispose of the site, St James's Hospital was a much loved and much valued local asset. The grounds, at the invitation of the hospital, had been used by generations of walkers, dog walkers and cyclists. In deciding to dispose of this site, NHS Property's own policy in disposing of heritage assets, underpinned by the Historic England guidance, should have ruled out selling the site solely based on securing a profit. They are advised by government practice and Historic England guidance that, and I quote, price is not to be the overriding objective. This rule was broken here. If instead of the 3.3 million indicated as the purchase price in the applicant's own viability assessment, the setting and context of the listed building had been prioritised as it should have been, then a significantly lower sales price would have been appropriate. Profit has been put before the historic setting and the context of the listed building, long-established public amenity and the natural environment. It should not have been. Everything that's transpired since, including splitting the site and not considering it as a whole, has been inappropriate. Whatever else you consider today, please do remember this point, because we simply should not be where we are. Having made that decision, arriving at this point became an inevitability. In simple terms, the property developer, PJ Livesey, has offered to overpay for the site, and in order to make their sums add up, has been forced by NHS Property to ride roughshod over the issues of protected trees, historic setting, loss of open space, affordable housing and traffic concerns. This site has not been treated as a heritage location needing to be sensitively protected for future generations. Instead, it has been treated only as a historic building, and the grounds, the setting in which the hospital and its curtilage listed villas sit, have been largely treated as just any other brownfield site being redeveloped. The bitter injustice of this should not be overlooked by the committee. Now, whilst you cannot turn back time and this application needs to be judged, you do have the ability to hold the developer to the highest standards and accept no compromise. These are matters for your judgment, and that judgment is reserved to you under planning law. Only the planning inspectorate can overrule you. Let them do that if they must, but do not give up the fight just yet. Please fight for Milton. As a matter of your judgment, you have the ability to say that the loss of protected trees is unacceptable and that in your view the replacement tree planting proposed does not enhance and protect the historic landscape. In particular, the loss of trees and open space on the site known as Matron's Garden, a unique landscape in this city, is wholly unacceptable and is in breach of policies EMV1 and EMV2 of the Milton Neighbourhood Plan. Rather than respecting the hospital and its setting, these 3 houses and their parking spaces are included by the developer's own admission purely to drive profit. As a committee, you can say that you do not find this acceptable and therefore add it as a reason for refusal. As a matter of judgment, you can say that the blocky flat roof design of the new builds does not protect and enhance the setting of the listed hospital building and add this as a reason for refusal. The relevant policy here is PCS 23. As a matter of judgment, you can say that the new build elements located to the northeast of the hospital building actually harm the setting of the listed hospital building, and therefore policy MT4 applies and is further supported by policy STJ1 and policy MH1 of the Milton Neighbourhood Plan. As a matter of fact, you can say that whereas the officer report at the January committee indicated unequivocally that there is no net loss of open space, it said quantitatively the proposed scheme will deliver an approximate 60% increase in amount of open space on the site. This was categorically incorrect. The subsequent appearance almost 10 months later of the developer's own open space note completely contradicts this and acknowledges, and I quote, there would be a loss of designated open space on the site. This committee was misinformed and therefore did not interrogate this issue. This is extremely important. As I stated at the beginning, St James's grounds at the invitation of the hospital have been used by generations of walkers, dog walkers and cyclists. The fencing off of the site only occurred recently, shortly before COVID. Public access, established over many decades, was suddenly removed. To argue that there is a public benefit in returning that access and that in some way justifies the loss of existing open space is frankly nonsensical. As a result, you can take a judgment that since there has been open access to the public to St James's Hospital ground for decades, the officer view that there is a public benefit in sacrificing open space in return for public access is erroneous and contrary to PCS 13. Even more importantly, PCS 13 does not talk about public open space, only open space. So the argument that there is some compensatory benefit is entirely irrelevant and should be dismissed. If you do not add these additional reasons for refusal, then all you're going to do in refusing this application as it is presented in the officer report is completely absolve yourselves of responsibility and take no view. The outstanding habitat assessment will definitely be concluded. The economic viability assessment will be updated accordingly and show no affordable housing can be provided as rules allow a 20% developer profit. There will then be no obstacles whatsoever by the time this reaches appeal in April. You will effectively be rubber stamping the developer's application. Please do not do this. Remember the clear injustice that this site is being sold for profit instead of protecting its heritage and importance to the community, as should have happened. Please add these reasons for refusal that I have outlined, which support the view of the Milton Neighbourhood Planning Forum, my fellow councillors, and those whose forensic examination of the issues is a beacon of justice in this whole sorry affair.
Thank you. Councillor Sanders.
Thank you, Chris. Today is probably one of the most bizarre situations I've ever encountered at any planning committee. We have a developer who has chosen to appeal, not on the grounds of a decision the committee took, but on the grounds of a decision the committee didn't take, because it didn't have the information. Yet the committee report today says 11 months on, you still don't have that information in key respects. That is frankly bizarre. And that's not down to you, it's not down to the officers, it's just crazy. You've got a situation whereby you have a series of people actually saying the refusal doesn't go far enough. That again is the first time I've heard that in a very, very long time in my 20 years being a councillor. But we do so because we believe that this site is wrong, this scheme is wrong, and you can do so much better. You have a developer who chose to submit an appeal for non-determination on the 18th of August 2022, the day that Milton voted for a neighbourhood plan. My view, and I may be wrong, is that they did that because they wanted to take the neighbourhood plan out of the equation. Well, they got that wrong, didn't they? And thanks to Councillor Vernon Jackson, thanks to Mr Maguire and others, we are here today to decide on a scheme whose appeal for non-determination is going to be decided in April. That to me is again bizarre, but that is not down to the officers, that is not down to the committee. So I want to start my remarks, if I may, on the one bit that I think we all agree on. That affordable housing is not policy compliant on this site. I have to say the use of the NPPF in the officer report is the first I've heard of it, which is saying essentially brownfield sites, well, it can be different and you have to replenish brownfield sites and you don't have to worry about that. We understand the government has scrapped housing targets. We'll believe it when we see it, but we understand that the government has scrapped housing targets. But to say that with brownfield sites, homes people can afford don't matter is wrong. And we have a developer who has shown absolutely no interest at all in trying to provide affordable homes on this site, unlike Homes England, who in the very next door site is offering something that is policy compliant. So we're in the weird position of actually supporting the officer's recommendation. But we want you to go further because we believe in key issues. There still remain things that you still cannot decide, as your officer's report indicates. And the first of those is the one that really affects the area of Milton I represent, which is traffic. Kimberly has already talked about the traffic that is on Moorings Way. I was one of those people who did the survey in 2014 and got soaked for my pleasure. But the roads were rammed then, the roads are rammed now, and there is no, and again, before you today, there is no updated information on traffic. That came from 2021. Now, I was here when the committee refused the City Life application, in part because of the impact on parking, because the information was out of date. The information remains out of date. You still cannot decide whether the traffic impact is sufficient because the information is not new. As far as the open space is concerned, I support colleagues with regards to this. The Barton-Wilmore note from December 2021 talks about a loss of designated open space. Steve and Kimberley have been too kind not to mention, in addition to the plan work, the greening strategy that this Cabinet approved just before the pandemic occurred, which also beefed up the provisions to make sure that something like, say, the Moneyfields development, where there was a net loss of open space, of designated open space, hopefully can't happen again. We have to preserve green space in our city. I know all too well from talking to many people who want homes, they don't just want a home, they want a community. They want a community, they don't just want concrete. If the developer had done what the people at the prison had done, and actually after the committee had decided for an all-private development of 267 homes, for the developer to work with an affordable housing provider to provide homes Portsmouth people can afford, that might have worked. But as I've said, the developer has shown no sight and no interest in this. So what has changed since January? Well, the Emperor actually has some clothes. The Emperor had no clothes in January. They have put some pants on, as far as I'm concerned, particularly around the design. Where there have been changes, we can argue about design till the cows come home, but I'm delighted that they found some underwear. Unfortunately, on issues such as traffic and on affordable housing, the clothes remain somewhere else. And that, I think, is disappointing as far as the site is concerned. So I encourage committee actually to go further in it, to actually support the officer recommendation to refuse, but to go further, to say that yet again the committee is in no position to decide on what the traffic impact is. The committee is also going to refuse on the grounds of open space, in part because of what the client's own consultant, Barton-Wilmore, said was the case, which is a net loss of designated open space. But I have to say the problem is not the committee, the problem is not the planning officers. All of us have done a reasonable job in bizarre circumstances of demonstrating some political and officer leadership in all this. The fault lies with the developer for believing that they could take us for a ride, believing that they could submit an appeal for non-determination when there's nothing to determine in many cases, for doing it on the day Milton voted for a neighbourhood plan because they hoped that it wouldn't be included. But thanks to Mr Maguire and Mr Vernon Jackson, it now is. But also I urge the developers, please, be realistic. There is no information to determine this site. Please throw out your appeal for non-determination now. If you want to appeal for a refusal, that's absolutely fine. That's your judgment, but throw out your appeal now and let us work on what we know, not on what we don't know. I support the officer recommendation, but as Milton colleagues have said, we should go much, much further. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you. Councillor Vernon Jackson.
Thank you. I'm in the unenviable position of going last, but I'll try to be quick. Ian, could I ask, is it possible to put up the plan of the hospital? You had a very helpful plan. Yeah, that's brilliant. Thank you very much indeed, Ian. So, ladies and gentlemen, normally I'm sitting with you as a member of the Planning Committee, but I can't on this occasion because I have a settled view on this. This is a hugely important site. It was built by the City Council when councils did this, and it was built to be in a quiet and calm environment to help people with mental health problems. And therefore the setting of the hospital is enormously important. I'd suggest, colleagues, there are 7 reasons to turn this down. The first, I think, is, as Ian has said, about the effect upon the wildlife of the area, the effect upon that, which is contrary to PCS 13. The second, of course, is the lack of affordable housing, which I'm sure we will all regret. And until the calculation is done, that I think still needs to be in there, which is PCS 19. The third reason I think is, for me, is really important, which is the loss of protected trees. In this committee, we often have reports coming to us where there's an application to remove a tree that the council has got a tree preservation order on. And we debate these, and some of them are justified and some of them aren't. The bit that really worries me here are the 3 detached houses that colleagues can see just to the right of the top of the cricket ground. They're being built in what is called Matron's Gardens, but is in reality a woodland setting. It's a wood, great for wildlife. And the heart of that wood is being ripped out for profit. Now, we've been to talk to the developer, and they've been very, very clear with us that these 3 houses bringing them the most profit. And that's why they can justify in their minds ripping out the heart of this woodland. And I think we would all find that very, very difficult. And again, it's breaking PCS 13. In terms of the designs of the little Lego boxes that have been littered around this site, we, as a committee, made a decision that a 6-foot fence on where the red line is on the furthest right of the plot, just north of the chapel, a 6-foot fence there would harm the setting of this listed building. And that wasn't challenged. That's still there. If putting a 6-foot fence there is going to harm the setting of this listed building, meant to be in a rural area, putting these little Lego boxes all round of it has to be much worse, and therefore be breaking the design PCS 23. And therefore we should be saying no on that reason. Colleagues will know that this has been open space for generations after generations until the NHS very recently restricted access. We've looked at the loss of open space, and it was previously misreported, as we've heard in the committee report. It's been open for years and years and years, and even if it was the only reason, then the loss of open space and the breaching of PCS 13 is a reason to turn this down. And because the previous report was inaccurate, it doesn't seem to me there's anything wrong in adding that as a reason now, when the previous report reported this inaccurately. My 6th reason would be the way in which this does not contribute towards having a decent cycle route through. Colleagues will know that this always used to be a vital part of a commuter cycle route coming down the Eastern Road, going through the hospital and then down to the seafront. That's been shut by the NHS for a while, but the replacement that's been put in is not a route for people to be able to commute through. It goes through these little Lego boxes in a really badly thought through manner. There was a really simple way of improving it, and if they'd done that, that would have been great. But I think this clearly breaks PCS 16 and 17. I think, for me, the last reason for refusal was the image that was shown by Ian of what the replacements or the changes to the current building would be. And it's unfortunate that there's going to be the loss of quite a lot of the really good Victorian detailing in the existing building. Ian, I don't know if could you show the slide with the current and what is likely to go forward? Carry on. Next one. That's not. Colleagues, if you could see in the building, in the main building, there are arches over the windows, as is very Victorian, and little gables over the front 3 windows. All of those go. All of those have been removed, which I think is really, really depressing. So we're losing lots of the historical detailing that make such an interesting Victorian building interesting. And this is just making slapdash changes to a building that I think are really unfortunate and really do harm. So, colleagues, I think there are 7 reasons for refusal. I'm sure colleagues will be able to add to that number, but I hope that we can be unanimous as a committee in turning this down and sending a clear message that actually profit shouldn't overtake the need for decent development, protecting of wildlife, and making sure that there's affordable housing, a decent cycle track through, and that we protect protected trees. Thank you, colleagues.
Thank you. Okay. Colleagues, questions? Who wants to start? Councillor Mason.
I have a number of questions, but my first question is on information which we may or may not have any information about, which is how Natural England are responding, and especially in the case of protected species such as the Brent geese. Now, we've come across on Brent geese a number of times in the past. Do we have any information as to what their view is on the dear beloved Brent geese and other protected species with relation to this development?
Thank you, Chairman. I don't wish to prejudge what they'll come back with, so at this point, no, we don't have that more up-to-date information to inform either the habitat regulation assessment or the viability appraisal. They are, as I say, the extant reasons to withhold plan permission that we're recommending to the planning inspectorate, so the committee is not being asked to provide any further commentary on that. Personally, while I cannot prejudge what Natural England have said, looking at the preliminary results we've had back from the survey work done at Milton Common, I'm not anticipating a material change to the current mitigation strategy, which was methodologically found to be acceptable previously. So I do anticipate that matter will be resolved with an updated management strategy for Milton Common. But I will obviously need to complete that work and engage with Natural England before we get their final comment.
Have you got another question, Councillor Mason?
I'll ask it later.
Okay. Councillor New next.
Thank you, Chair. I don't think I sat on the original application when it came forward in January. And so am I right in thinking then, basically, it's kind of joined up with Councillor Hugh Mason's question, that we've literally been waiting for that feedback from Natural England since that time, possibly before, so say a year as around?
No. To be clear, Natural England raised their concern late in the day. I think it was either on the day of the committee or could have been the day afterwards. So their concern raised that the existing Milton Common Local Nature Reserve Management Framework was out of date in their view, came after the committee resolution. There's been ongoing work to update that mitigation strategy. So it's not that we've just been twiddling our thumbs waiting for a comment. It was agreed with the appellant, with Natural England, with the planning officers, that the mitigation strategy that was previously being relied upon needed updating, and the work has been undertaken since then to update that strategy.
Okay, so thank you for that, I understand. So it is pretty much within a year. So the work then that's being undertaken now requires further consultation with Natural England, is that correct? Because I think as a city, like, we've clearly undertaken quite a lot of work, you know, and credit to the administration on that with regards to protected species like the Brent geese, you know, or unique habitats. You know, I've certainly seen the work that's taken place on Milton Common, where areas of kind of shrubland has been cleared, etc. We I think that as a city we go to great lengths to look after these species, even though they can be a massive pain in the backside when it comes to development. I think that's no understatement. And so this is kind of disappointing, really, that we're sat here a year on, basically, in the round. I have quite a lot of sympathy with my colleagues who have made deputations today on this, and it's not criticism of the officers. I appreciate this work's got to be done, you know, and it's incredibly, or taken incredibly seriously by many quarters. But, yeah, it's a bit rubbish, really, isn't it?
Councillor Symes.
Have we any records of how much vehicle movement there was when the hospital was working as a hospital, with the patients and visitors and deliveries that would have been undertaken during that time? Have we a comparison there where we know that?
Yes, the nature of transport assessment, where it does have actual survey work, can be used. As you go back further to historical, that survey work becomes less relevant and is often not there. But what one does is uses standardised databases. We know the number of vehicle movements associated with a hospital or an office or a house, etc. So that work certainly was done and was discussed with the appellant, as I say. The suggestion that one should benchmark it against a fully occupied hospital floor space to the size of the existing one is not a reasonable position in our view as professional officers, nor is the height of the vaccination centre vehicle movements the reasonable benchmark. An alternative benchmark, which is roughly the 2014 reduced occupancy, we felt was more representative of a likely alternative. And what one does when we're looking at transport assessments is you look at, well, if we say no to development, so basically you can only do those things that don't require planning permission, i.e. go back in and reoccupy the building within the same use class, i.e. for similar uses, how many vehicle movements would you expect to see? And that's what's been compared to the proposed residential vehicle movements. Obviously is a smaller number, but probably a higher number overall, but a higher number during the peak hours, because obviously residents have a fairly predictable inward-outward migration from homes in the way that an institutional would have a more spread space, and indeed an office, again, would have a more peak hour activity. So there's very clear national guidance that's been applied by your highway authority experts to give you the advice that there is some minor improvements needed to local junctions, which they are satisfied that those improvements can be done and are sufficient to mean that planning permission should not be withheld on highway safety or capacity grounds.
Has it been taken into consideration that a lot more people are working from home now, so that would actually adjust the vehicle movements at peak times, wouldn't it?
So the national database hasn't been updated yet to deal with many major changes. There isn't really the data available yet to say that a lot more people are working from home, and that materially changes the activities. What's been suggested by local people and by ward members is there's more cars on the road in peak times, not less, as a home working change would have occurred. Certainly, we've seen reductions in use of public transport post-COVID, which obviously help balance out, if help is the right word, a reduction in people moving at all. That balance between an increase in reliance on private car versus a reduction in demand for private car with home working going up, obviously informs of activities. While home working is certainly a notable trend in a significant number of industries, there's obviously a significant number of industries that can't home work and therefore continue to commute during peak hours.
Councillor New.
Thank you, Chair. So it's really following on from some of the comments in the deputation from Councillor Vernon Jackson, just with regards to some of the changes, especially to the historical Victorian frontage. Can we bring up the graphic, please, which shows the proposal and the current? There was a really good front-facing elevation.
Yeah, if I may interrupt, Chairman, because I was going to take a clarification on this. So before Councillor New potentially makes the same error that Councillor Vernon Jackson did, this is not a before and after shot. This is the front and back.
Okay.
All of those high quality details to the thing which you see in the upper image, the front elevation, are entirely unaltered. That heritage is retained. At the rear, and I think somewhere I probably have the existing, if you bear with me. Yeah, there's the existing. As you can see, at the rear, they don't have that same degree of detailing, and that bottom image, the rear elevation, is being altered. If you can just hold that in your minds for a second, and I'll try and get back nice and quick, to adding in those additional blue alterations. So the suggestion that a significant amount of alteration to the elevational treatment is occurring to the detriment is not really supported by the drawings, I would suggest.
Could I withdraw that part of my deputation then? Thank you very much, Ian. That's very helpful.
Same. There's no point in going forward on that point then.
Councillor Smith.
It was just a question about the space, really. So before we had access, we enjoyed the access to the open space. And then, obviously, NHS, they've closed that space off now. It's just to try and get this understood, just to try and get a clarification on it, really. And then, obviously, going forward, under PCS 13, we're going to have the benefit, the right of the space. Can you just clarify that a little bit more, please?
Certainly, and if I may also undertake a clarification from the deputations, a number of statements were made that PCS 13 applies to all open space, not just designated open space. That's not true. PCS 13 is not an unconditional protection for open space in the city. I'll read it so you've got the absolute clear wording. You should refuse plan permission for proposals which result in the net loss of existing areas open space as shown on map 21. And those which would compromise the overall integrity of the green infrastructure network in the city, unless there are wider public benefits. There are two types of open space that are protected by PCS 13, those shown on map 21, and those that would, otherwise would compromise the overall green infrastructure network of the city. You can compromise them if there are wider public benefits, but if it's a piece of land which the land north of Matron's Garden, to be absolutely clear, Matron's Garden is shown on map 21, is designated open space, is being lost. But that's it. The rest of the open space, open and space though it may be, is only protected by PCS 13 in principle if its loss would compromise the overall green infrastructure network of the city. As there is a substantive replacement, there is a matter of disagreement between parties about whether it's plus or minus 10% of quantitative green space. As there is a substantive replacement, might be 10% less, but officers are satisfied this does not compromise the overall green infrastructure network of the city. So consequently, the development north of that road, the development around the north of the space, the development of the airing courts, is not considered to be contrary to PCS 13 by officers. Matron's Garden absolutely is, not pretending otherwise. It is a negative aspect of the scheme as recognised entirely within the report. And similarly, I must stress it's been suggested that the previous report misrepresented open space. Officers do reject that. We are satisfied with that information. Again, there is an increase in the accessibility. Your point, your question, Councillor Smith. So it's again how numbers and statistics and damn lies and all of that. But what we've got is there's areas that how publicly accessible open space has been defined by the applicant. The cricket pitch, for example. So it's not. So that is an area of designated open space south of the road in the same way. No developments occurring on it, of course, but it is an area of open space. The rest of the site, while historically it was a hospital, it's public space, so people managed to get into it. They had no right to enter it, and the hospital did indeed close off areas and routes and accesses on a regular basis, as is common practice with landowners to prevent the establishment of a right-of-way or a village green or other similar future applications. Under the new proposal, they propose a public access agreement that's taking those areas that they are proposing to dedicate to public access to make sure that that access is not just dedicated by a whim of a landowner that could change in the future, but is a covenant placed on the land as part of the deed, as part of the Section 106 proposal. So there'll be substantively additional areas on top of the cricket pitch and the routes through the site, which would be dedicated for public access through and around those spaces. When you compare the cricket pitch, etc., to that new dedicated space, that's 60% bigger. So again, that's why I'm satisfied that the numbers are right, but numbers are only going to take you so far. As always, and I've said this many times, planning is not a numbers game. Don't get too distracted on these points. There is a loss of designated open space. The Matron's Garden, an area of woodland with a clearing in the middle, which is north of the public open space, but in private land, that is designated as open space in PCS 13 in the Milton Neighbourhood Plan. That is being, majority of which lost. It's a bit around the edge, of course, which is retained, but the bit in the middle is being lost. That is a big negative of the scheme. The rest of the white land, the rest of the open space around the hospital, which totally different point to the setting of the listed building, of course, but the rest of the open space has no right of public access. There has been past public access Absolutely, no one's denying that. But as demonstrated by the NHS closing the site now, the landowner has the right to close off that public access. The offer, which is a qualitative benefit, which I advise you to give significant weight to. How that weight changes your judgment is your judgment, but you can't deny it's a fact. That offer to guarantee public access in perpetuity through Section 106 is the benefit, or one of the benefits that the scheme is putting in play. As always with planning, it's that mixture of positives and negatives. There are ugly buildings, institutional annexes, etc., being demolished and new buildings going in. That changes the setting, positives and negatives. There are spaces that are currently buildings and hardstanding that are becoming green, and spaces that are currently green that are becoming dwellings, positives and negatives. There is the construction on Matron's Garden, designated open space, negative. There's the provision of a couple of hundred homes for Portsmouth, positive. It's that balance together, which obviously members need to apply their judgment to.
No, I was going to say it's very clear. Thank you very much indeed.
Right. Councillor Smythe.
Could we look at the overall layout slide again, please? I'm concerned with the damage to the setting done by those 9 or possibly 6 houses in the top right-hand corner of the development, just to the left of the red fence line. I mean, I'm less concerned about the flat roof or the other homes, the white homes on the left of the site, on the west of the site. Have there been discussions about not building, particularly the 6 homes, or maybe more than 6 homes, but what's marked as 6 blocks on the northeastern corner of the site? Because that clearly will have an effect on the setting of the building, viewed particularly from that side and indeed from the south east as well. Have there been any discussions about that? I don't think one can talk about all the new homes in the same breath as Councillor Vernon Jackson did, because I personally don't have any objection to the ones in the northern part of the site, northwestern part.
Yes, there's been extensive pre-application discussions talking about where best to place new homes. So this is part of an allocation MT4, which always presumed dwellings being provided on this site. Part of chunk of the bit closest to the hospital is car parking. As you go out towards that eastern edge, that's the current green space, not designated green space, but currently a piece of green space, and construction is impacted on that. As I say, there's always pros and cons for every development, but yeah, that would have formed part of the detailed discussions that certainly I've seen pre-apps going back long before my appointment here at Portsmouth City Council, I must stress. But yes, that would have been a discussion, but as always, it falls to the Council and now the Planning Inspectorate to judge the application as made. If the provision of dwellings in that area is going to result in an adverse impact, heritage impact on setting, or character impact on open space, then clearly that is a judgment that the decision maker, the Planning Inspectorate, can make, and a judgment this committee can make should they wish to make representations to that effect.
Thank you.
Councillor Mason.
Coming to this very sensitive area from the heritage point of view, the Matron's Garden, where it is proposed to remove a large number of trees which have TPOs on them and replace with 3 houses. Clearly, if that is going to be done, these houses must be of the highest design standards to justify the removal of the trees. Do we have any outline of what these houses will look like?
If I may, yes, we do. I don't have them on the slides, unfortunately. They are a similar architectural treatment as the ones you've seen, the flat roof brick design with some bit detailing around the windows, but unfortunately I don't. While we have this is a full application.
Okay.
We have full details of those houses. I don't unfortunately have them on slides for you today.
So they would suffer from what the committee in January considered to be the same defects as the rest of the houses, yes?
They are a similar architectural style. It has been said that the committee did not support the scheme. Similarly, the committee did not refuse the scheme. So I don't want to prejudge or rejudge what the committee is for you to now make a judgment of whether that is an acceptable design or not, based on the submissions and the consultation that's been undertaken 3 times now.
Right, thank you.
Colleagues, any more questions? Shall we move on to comments? No? Councillor Smythe.
I'd like to make a comment that we're already recommended to refuse this application because of the Brent Geese, the PCS 13. I would like to think we should add a refusal reason under affordable housing, the loss of protected trees and the loss of open space in Matron's Gardens, but I'm less persuaded about the other 2 potential reasons for refusal that were introduced by Councillor Vernon Jackson. I think a cycle route could be created, and I also do think that we do need to look at the housing being built on this site, because we are very short of homes, even not regarding the potential for the central government to withdraw the targets. We still do need more homes in some areas in Portsmouth. So I'd like to propose that we add those 3 reasons for refusal, and then follow the officer's recommendations.
Thank you.
Just point of clarity, obviously the affordable housing point is covered as the second part of that linked issue, so that's not,
so leave that one in.
So the 2 concerns, the loss of designated open space at Matron's Garden, and obviously the loss of mature trees would be the 2 additional reasons of concern.
And Matron's Garden is clearly also results in the loss of fewer trees. So
there's obviously a link between those 2.
So to clarify, Councillor Smythe, so you want to add 1 condition?
I mean, we're still in a position of others making comments, but I was proposing the loss of protected trees was important, but also the loss of open space in Matron's Garden, which is probably also going to overlap with that second recommendation. But I don't know the numbers there.
Thank you. Any other comments? Councillor Mason.
I would follow that up by noting that the Woodland Trust study of constituencies within England shows with the exception of, I think, part of the Fens, Portsmouth South has the lowest amount of woodland. We therefore need to be very, very careful to protect the woodland which we have. And I would agree with Councillor Smythe on the importance of preserving protected trees wherever possible. I am particularly concerned about the environmental impact and also the impact on the heritage aspect of the buildings which are being proposed for Matron's Garden. So I would certainly support Councillor Smythe's view on this.
Thank you. And the heritage aspects, how would you like to move forward with that as a note?
I think that is, at this stage is something which we can note rather than use as a ground for refusal.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments before we make some progress?
Chairman, if I can just add, so we have if I may, we have a motion from Councillor Smythe that appears to have been largely, or potentially could be seconded by Councillor Mason. So as we're moving towards that direction, if I may, and just to highlight paragraph 7.2 of the report, that if members, if that is a motion and a seconding, I don't want to make a presumption, but and the committee then votes for that, the committee may like to consider whether they wish to nominate a member or members of this committee to bring that evidence to the public inquiry. I'm in no way disagreeing that there is a loss of designated open space, nor that there is a loss of protected trees. The fact that that warrants a reason for refusal is not something officers professionally agree with, and consequently it would be for members of this committee to come along and give that proof of evidence at a public inquiry. At a public inquiry, you are giving your own evidence, your own opinion, and as that's not my opinion, I can't give that. It's different from a hearing or a written representation. So if this moves forward to vote, I would invite the committee to consider whether today they wish to make that nomination, or indeed something we can pick up over the next few days, because obviously I want to make sure that those members get the maximum support they can to give their evidence to that inquiry.
Yeah, thank you for highlighting that part of the report. Councillor Nidd and Councillor Smythe.
Thank you, Chair. It's really a question perhaps to people higher up. Why is that? Why is it that over the past 2 years since I've been back on this planning committee, that for the last decades that I've sat on this, that when there have been controversial applications come forward, we never had things like that where you had to nominate people. The officers always represented the City Council on behalf of the committee on the decision that they made. It just seems like, you know, and perhaps I am talking out of step here, but I don't particularly care. I'll be gone in May. But it just seems to be that there are weird things happening here. And there seems to be a lot of passing the buck, and you're making decisions that we don't really want to justify. Well, that is their job, in my opinion. So why is it that we would have to, as a committee, put somebody forward to go and represent a decision that's made here under, you know, the powers that are given to us as elected members that are voted on to come and sit on these committees? Why are the officers not the people then actually putting that forward as the paid professionals? Or dare I say, somebody like the chief exec, who also has a background in planning, is where he came from.
Yeah.
As detailed, it's because it's an inquiry, and this is not new. This is what every competent authority does, and it's certainly been my 20 years of experience doing this. You have the right to apply your judgment and make decisions quite correctly. This is a democratic system. With rights come responsibilities. You need to be held accountable for your decisions in the same way officers need to be held accountable for their decisions. So consequently, as is always the case, you've had very few public inquiries on matters that have been overturned by committees. I'm not surprised many of you will have little experience of the need for members to come along and represent their own views in an inquiry, because where there has been inquiries, and there's been a couple but not many, officers have shared the same views with the committee, or indeed it's been an officer judgment, not a committee judgment. But where we have a clear distinction, this committee needs to put someone forward to explain how they've come to that conclusion, how they've weighted the information available to them, and defend their position. That is the planning system, and always has been.
Thank you, Chair. If I could follow up on that. I don't accept that. I've sat on the other controversial applications, and I have to say the former Deputy Head of Planning was always very, very helpful in terms of, as you have been as well, so this isn't an individual criticism, it's just more to try and understand. She would always come forward with this is the legality, these are the reasons why, and so what you're saying is this is the reasoning for your decision today, etc. And she would assist in the same way that Kieran does with the legal wording, etc., and the other solicitors. So I think really my point stands. It feels like passing the buck. And while you may disagree with that, I just think it's bonkers, and I've never seen anything like it in all the time I've sat here. And I have been here when there have been fairly controversial applications come forward, least of all around the Northern Quarter, etc., as other colleagues can attest who've also sat through that. So I don't buy what you're saying, and I think that perhaps away from this we need to ask the Chief Executive and perhaps through the Leader of the Council to look into this. I don't think it's right that actually members of us should have to go forward to a public inquiry if it came to that. I do think that legal officers should, the officers here who are helping form the decision and the legality and whether it stands should actually be the people to do that. And dare I say, as I mentioned previously, the Chief Executive.
I'm going to ask Kieran if you can advise, and then I'll come back to you.
I just want to make a couple of comments to sort of inform that debate. I support what Ian Maguire says, and that other authorities do put members forward to support reasons for refusal that officers in their professional opinion in accordance with their code of conduct do not feel they can support. If anyone's interested, you might want to look at Rules 11 and 12 of the Royal Town Planning Institute's Code of Conduct, which actually addresses this directly. So it's an unusual thing for Portsmouth, and as Ian has explained, we don't actually get that many inquiries, which is probably why you haven't seen this quite so often, and it has to be an odd fact pattern for you to end up in this scenario. But that's where you are, and ultimately it's not unreasonable for you as elected politicians to have the courage of your convictions at a public inquiry and explain what your thinking is when you've been told by professional paid officers that they would not do that.
I'm going to go to Ian and then to Councillor Smith.
And so, members, I do hope you can reject the comments made by Councillor New entirely. Officers are here to provide assistance, which is why I want to know who it is we'll be providing assistance to, as I'd be clear the reasons that have been mooted, I won't say more than that at this point, around the designated open space and the loss of DPH reach. We will help you put the wording together for that, but it is not our opinion. It is potentially, you haven't voted yet, your opinion, and consequently it is your job to defend your opinion.
And there we get to it, Chair.
Consequently, if I may complete my statement, I do strongly reject the suggestions that you just don't buy it, that somehow officers are acting unprofessionally in providing what has been clearly explained to you by your Chief Planning Officer and your legal advisor, that this is normal practice and the expected activity of an LPA. So I do find it quite offensive to suggest that somehow officers are making a choice that will be anything but professional.
Okay.
I didn't say that you weren't being professional, and if I could just interject back there, thank you, Kieran. I think actually your wording there completely backed up what I said. It's not usual for Portsmouth and other places to do it, but Portsmouth hasn't done that in the past. And actually a suggestion has been made is that actually perhaps the committee would like to suggest that the chief exec is the person that goes forward to the public inquiry, especially as a professional planner. So I would like to propose that and put that forward.
Okay. Well,
If I may, the same code of conduct point will arise as with the chief exec as a professional planner, potentially. So that's something you may want to consider.
And also as the head of paid staff services as well, he would be able to represent the City Council. So he has, there's a duality as far as I'm concerned on that. And I think that that would be the right thing to do.
Okay, well, we'll get there in a minute, I think. Councillor Smythe.
I don't want to endorse that recommendation at all, but I do want to say that April is a time of elections and we are all in purdah. I think that is a real problem for people. And second of all, that I assume that there'd need to be a representative of the Planning Committee, and that clearly is the chair. In all other, if it's a committee decision, it's a chair's responsibility to take that role. And the third thing is that I assume the Milton councillors who've rightly declared an interest and abstained would also be representing the council if purdah allowed. But I'm seriously worried that purdah doesn't really allow this sort of activity during April.
Who wants to pick up on the purdah point?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. My first thoughts on that are purdah generally bites the authority, not the planning inspectorate. So it's an interesting question I would have to do some more research on and get back to you. But I could see an argument that actually, because it's not council resources being deployed, it's not necessarily a purdah issue. I think it's arguable, though. But I understand why you raise it.
I have no doubt that the planning inspectors can meet when they want, but any councillor going to represent the city would be banned by purdah, I'm sure.
If I may, this is not unusual to say. I've done lots of inquiries during purdah over the years. As always, the council business carries on during purdah. What the pre-election period prevents is council resources making points that have a political output. The council can carry on representing the local planning authority, the council as a corporate body, and it does throughout this period. It is the council resources being applied to political outputs, individual members, parties, etc. The pre-election period is in place to prevent. So there is nothing. We did flag purdah with the inspector when he gave us the April deadline that he wanted to work towards, but that's something he's fully aware of, and quite rightly has said, well, this is not a political decision. None of the decisions made by the planning authority are political decisions by law, so it has no impact on it and in no way prevents a representative of the planning committee whatsoever political party they may be, representing the planning committee, nor does it prevent individual members, and you've mentioned the ward members, attending as either interested persons or formally applying, which is a debate I know they're having, to apply to be Rule 6 parties, which is a formal third party designation. They will be coming along, if you will, under their own dime to make their own contributions, so they wouldn't be representing the council, they'd be representing themselves, albeit themselves as a ward member, not applying council resources and consequently unaffected by the pre-election period restrictions. So that PERDA problem is not an issue for either a representative of the council as a whole or a ward member representing themselves. It would only be an issue if council resources was put to support an individual member making their own case, which obviously could have political connotations in that sensitive period.
I won't argue this any further here, but I think there are party political issues that could in fact intervene in this case. But I won't pursue it now. I'm glad you've considered it, but that's a decision for another time. We're not making that decision now, I don't think. I think I've moved a recommendation that we add two of those reasons for refusal, and I'm going back to Councillor Pitt's wording, whether or not we can use that. We could use the refusal number. It wouldn't be 1, it would be 3 at the bottom of
You have me at an advantage. I haven't got a copy
Pitt's
of the
second first page, and we could use
Thank you. What we don't have is a seconder for your proposal at this moment in time.
well, that's why I'm trying to make it more clear so that we can move on.
Okay.
Yes, the other one is yes, probably it's not numbered here, but the bit halfway.
Councillor Smythe, it might help if you...
Point, but
So there's 2 points. If you need to articulate your reasons in a way that we can then, as officers, read back to you, so that everyone in the meeting is clear as to what it is you're trying to articulate.
I understand that.
Yeah.
And when I did a summary before of what I thought we should be adding in, and I'm trying to see whether what Councillor Pitt has helpfully written out would be helpful to us.
Okay, so if you want to take some time to think about that and then sort of report back to the meeting, as it were, that would be helpful. And the second point, I think, is where we stand in terms of somebody nominated in terms of these additional 2 reasons for refusal.
Councillor Smith, what are your...
It was only a comment, really, Chair. It was just all of what Ian has said about representation. It might be worth nailing that down today, per the question being answered.
Okay. Anybody else while Councillor Smythe is considering some words? Councillor Mason.
If the planning committee, as such, is to be represented at the inquiry, it would surely only be proper that the chairman of the planning committee, for the time being, should represent this committee. Otherwise, there would be obviously a question in people's minds as to why the chairman was not presenting on behalf of the planning committee. So I'm afraid it's up to you, my friend.
Very kind. Well, let's see if we get that far. Let's see what's going to happen in the next few minutes. Anybody else? Anybody know any jokes?
Would you prefer to call a 5-minute adjournment
Well,
rather than sit here awkwardly?
Are you there? Are you there? Okay, we're there.
Thank you, Chair. I think the wording at the bottom of the first page of Councillor Pitt's deputation probably covers the 2 points that I'm suggesting we add in as reasons for refusal of this application.
starting...
It covers the loss of protected trees and it covers the loss of the open space in Matron's Garden under PCS 13. Can I ask people to just look at that? It's called Additional Reason for Refusal 1. The loss of protected trees is unacceptable, and in our view, the replacement tree planting proposed doesn't enhance and protect the historic landscape. In particular, the loss of trees and open space on the site known as Matron's Garden, a unique landscape in this city, is wholly unacceptable and is in breach of policies ENV 1 and ENV 2 of the Milton Neighbourhood Plan.
Members, any thoughts? Councillor Mason.
If that is being proposed, I would second it.
Was that formally proposed?
Yes.
So we have a proposal and a seconder.
So was that one reason bundling together trees and open space? Because you proposed them as
yes, it
separate
does.
grounds.
I did propose them as second, but I think they're quite. I would take your advice. Would it be more effective if we had two statements or one?
Well, I think I defer to Ian, but I think they're probably construed as separate grounds, most likely.
Yes, obviously this is turning into a proof of evidence rather than a decision notice, so I wouldn't be too worried about being hung up too much around that. I think it's perfectly clear that the loss of mature trees, particularly the wording you borrowed from Councillor Pitt's statement, so not exclusively but particularly at Matron's Garden, and the loss of open space at Matron's Garden are the two issues of concern, and the three grounds of harm associated with that you have articulated are loss of open space, loss of trees and heritage impact. So they would be, so whether that's one or two reasons for refusal, you're not producing a decision notice, so you don't need reasons for refusal. You need to guide that representative who will be presenting this case to the inspectorate, and I think that's relatively
I'm happy
clear.
to divide those into two, if that would be more helpful. So starting with the loss of protected trees.
We don't need to, though.
You don't? Okay.
Yeah, well, it's up to you. It's your motion, but I'm quite comfortable from what Ian's just said that
If we don't
it doesn't make a
need to,
difference,
then
really.
we'll
Actually.
We'll give it as one. Okay. Councillor Fielding.
Yeah, I was just making sure we're still including the conditions for refusal that are within the report as well.
So as per the officer's report,
Yeah.
plus an additional reason.
Yeah,
for these,
fine.
this
Yeah.
additional wording. Okay, and we have a formal proposal and a seconder. Shall we? Okay.
And actually, Chair, the outstanding point about you going forward to inquiry.
Well, should we do that after, if this gets through?
Well, it's part and parcel of the same thing.
Is it?
If I may, I think you can vote on whether this is the committee's resolution, and then we'll worry about the admin afterwards. Yes.
Okay, very well.
Ian's right. Okay, those in favour of the motion? You got that?
Sorry, Chair, I didn't realise you wanted me to announce the result. Yes, that was... the motion passed. The additional reasons for refusal in addition to the officers were approved.
Okay, thank you, Aaron. Okay, now to the second part about who goes along and represents us. I'm very happy to do that, clearly. We're all in agreement. It should be the chair. Yeah. Okay, thank you. I shall do that. Okay. Should we just take a couple of minutes just to catch our breaths? Okay, thank you. See you back here at a couple of minutes. Literally a couple of minutes. Go stretch your legs. Come back. Okay. It is 15:15. I've heard the bells. I do like to start on time. Okay. Shall we give Councillor New a moment then? Oh, I think he's gone. He's got to go to work. Isn't it? So we're waiting for one of the committee members. Is Councillor New coming back?
His laptop's still there.
Oh, it's always a good sign.
If he doesn't hear the presentation, he won't be able to vote.
You haven't seen Councillor New on your travels? He's gone. Okay. Well, let's go. Let's start. Listen time. Okay. Welcome back. Are we back online, Karen? Good. Okay, let's move on to Slindon Street. Item 5 on the agenda. Ian, over to you.
Thank you. This is the first of two applications at the post office site in Slindon Street. This application is an outline application with all matters reserved except access and scale, so you're looking to approve the principle of development, the access thereto and the scale thereof for a building up to 19 stories in height for 176 flats. As I say, we have two applications on what is currently one site. So this is the eastern application. The western application, which is a full application for conversion of the building into a hotel, will come next to on the agenda. But this is the outline for residential flats and the demolition of the relevant parts of the building. That is an illustration of the upper floors as the building would be potentially delivered. You can see there an aerial photograph of the building, a city centre location, highly sustainable just round the corner from the station and the main high street of Commercial Road. Currently forming part, the large open area making up part of the post office building. You can see the lower section there, which will be demolished to make way for a proposal of ground floor redevelopment. You can see a number of shared spaces and indeed an area of central parking, access off Lower Church Path, a small number of parking spaces, which would then lead into the upper floors. So there's a terrace, landscape terrace there, private space, and then an upper floor showing a number of flats spread in this illustration through the approved scale over a number of incrementally rising platforms up to 19 stories. You can see illustrated relatively smallly, apologies, there. So that's the alternative. You can see an area, this is the next application, the hotel proposal in front of it, and then the rising scale for flats behind it. That's obviously looking from the south, from Slindon Street itself, from Station Street itself. That's a cut through of it. I think you're probably getting the gist of what this looks like now. An outline application, as I say, for 176 flats in a tall building, 19 stories, largely car-free, a small amount of parking provided in that central courtyard area in a sustainable location of the city where we encourage new growth, which we consider is an appropriate use for the site. I would just draw your attention to the SMAT, a couple of late, I think we've got one late letter from Alan Pearce, who on behalf of Fusion Students, which is the scheme that has got planning permission for the 28-storey blocks immediately to the east of the site, supporting the proposal here for what consideration members may wish to give of that. Recommendation for approval of outline plan permission, and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. We have a deputation. So Mr. Adam, the applicant, would you like to go first?
Oh, forgive me, Chair. Can I ask for Tom to go first? He's our planning consultant.
Okay,
So,
yes.
Thanks.
You have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, my name is Tom Molyneux-Wright. I'm a chartered town planner for DPP Planning, the agents for the applications before you. I'm joined this afternoon by Sean Adams, who's the Chief Executive of National and Regional, who are the Hampshire-based developer, who is the development agent for these proposals, working with the site owner and applicant to deliver this development scheme. I'm speaking today in relation to both items 5 and 6, but I'll talk separately in relation to the hotel later on, which are submitted by the same applicant. The proposed new build residential development would be located on the eastern side of the site, and as you've heard, the hotel would be on the western side of the site in a converted post office building. Whilst they are separate applications for commercial reasons, which can be developed independently of each other, the proposals have been designed by Portsmouth-based architectural practice HGP Architects, so that when both delivered, it forms the comprehensive regeneration of this city centre site. The officer's report presents a detailed and balanced overview and assessment of the proposal, reaching a conclusion that the balance is in favour of approval for the application. The proposal has been subject to over 3 years of discussion pre and post submission of the application, and during this period, feedback provided by officers and third parties has been considered, and the scheme has been amended to reflect comments made. In respect of the residential scheme that we're discussing at the moment, this included reducing the building blocks from 2 separate blocks to 1 of varying heights, as was shown on the screen a moment ago, to show how a high-quality development of up to 19 stories, including the ground floor, can be appropriately accommodated on the site. Matters relating to appearance, landscaping and layout are to be considered under a subsequent reserve matters application, and so the local planning authority would retain full control over ensuring high-quality development is delivered when these details are submitted. The scale of the proposal at up to 19 stories, including ground floor, is lower than other sites granted consent in the locality, but will complement the evolving skyline of the city centre. The residential development will deliver approximately 176 new homes in a sustainable location through a mix of 1, 2 and 3 bedroom apartments. The submitted plans show how all apartments can benefit from amenity space through private balconies, communal terraces and the central courtyard, as indicated on the submitted plans. All properties will meet or exceed national space standards. The residential development will operate in the main as car-free due to its highly sustainable location, and this also aligns with the Council's recently adopted Clean Air Zone, which actively aims to reduce traffic. Of the 17 car parking spaces that are provided for the residential scheme, 6 will include EV charging points. But a total of 276 secure covered cycle spaces are provided within the scheme for the residential development, with additional short-stay public cycle spacing in addition to that, and a further 26 spaces separately for the hotel. So a lot of cycle parking is proposed. Details of the inbuilt sustainability measures include optimising the building fabric and incorporating energy efficiency measures, which will all be secured at the reserve matter stage, but will meet or exceed the building regulation requirements. As detailed in the officer's report, there are no statutory technical objections to this application. The principle of development for the application is supported by policy PCS4 of the Portsmouth Plan, which supports the delivery of new residential development in this location in the city centre. The site is in a highly sustainable location, only a short walk from a wide range of shops, services, and indeed very close to public transport connections. Together, the applications will generate over £2 million through community infrastructure levy payments to be spent on local infrastructure improvements. And this is in addition to Section 106 contributions together across the two schemes, totalling nearly £1 million towards nitrate mitigation, local employment and skills during construction, and travel plan monitoring. In summary, the proposal represents an opportunity to regenerate this prominent city centre site. And crucially, the assessment of the application proposal is that it will not result in any unreasonable adverse impacts which cannot be mitigated through conditions or financial contributions. And as such, the proposals are consistent with local planning policy and national planning policy guidance. As the officer's report concludes, the proposed development will optimise this brownfield site, introducing a range of uses, if it comes forward with the hotel on the adjoining part of the site, that will generate greater activity, contributing towards the vitality and vibrancy of the city centre and supporting economic growth within the area. I will now hand over to Sean Adams, who will comment as the development partner. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Chair, members, officers. We think this is an important project for Portsmouth City Centre. As a local developer, we've worked very hard to ensure that we can bring this forward as a residential scheme and not yet another student scheme in the city centre. Delivering high quality, high density residential schemes in city centres is very, very challenging. But I think with a combination of the hotel on this scheme and the residential offering, we have a genuine opportunity to deliver some residential development in the city centre, which hasn't happened for quite some time. We've been working on this scheme now for over 4 years. The scheme became vacant in 2016 with Royal Mail moving on, and we've worked very closely with officers across the authority to ensure that this is a high quality design and a deliverable scheme. We can't deny that we bring this forward to you in very challenging economic circumstances. However, we remain committed to the scheme and have been working very, very hard across both the public and the private sector when considering the delivery of the residential. It's acknowledged, and we recognise that under the current policies that there is no affordable housing delivered on site. However, we are working with registered social landlords and private sector investors outside of any Section 106 agreement to ensure the best outcome for this site. Ideally, it would be great to see if we could deliver this with in partnership with an RSL and the benefit of Homes England funding. Although, being an outline scheme at this stage, that is not yet determined. But we are determined to bring forward a detailed scheme as soon as we can identify the investor for the residential element of the scheme. But quite important to see this in front of members today for approval so that we can move on to that. As it was mentioned, we've been in this application now for almost 3 years, but I'm glad to say that ultimately we worked with officers in a positive fashion in the end. As Tom has already mentioned, the scheme delivers significant contributions in terms of community infrastructure levy, Section 106 and highway upgrades, and in total I believe that is actually in excess in total of over £3 million worth of contributions. Given that it's city centre and recent changes to building regs, this will be a highly sustainable scheme as well. So it will be taking advantage of all the technology that's available to ensure that renewable energies are brought into the scheme in accordance with local policy. I do hope members can support the scheme today. We're keen to move on. It's been a long time coming, but I think that this is an important residential catalyst for the city centre. We've not seen high-density residential development in the city centre here for many, many years, and I really do believe this is a genuine opportunity to bring that catalyst forward, which could be the opportunity to deliver now, but also for other residential schemes as they come through in the city centre as a future. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Adam. The bit I didn't hear was a commitment for social value. I'm sure a commitment for social value is part of the scheme. I'm sure that will be in there as well, if it gets through today. Okay, questions, members? Councillor Smythe.
What would be the number of affordable homes that would be expected of a residential development of this size, given that some of the building is being reused rather than built new? And could we put a condition on to secure that particular aspect of the development at this stage?
I'll have to ask the case officer to do that calculation because I don't have the vacant building credit information, but 30%, a bit less than 30% of 176 would be the answer. So there's a substantive amount of affordable housing that policy would have required, but for the viability evidence that's been assessed as part of this proposal. Can we impose a condition? No. The national guidance is very clear where a scheme is non-viable. The hit is taken to affordable housing, and as is detailed in quite a lot of detail in the report, we are satisfied evidence has been provided that it's not a viable scheme. Similarly, national policy guidance advises we can't put a review mechanism in through section 106 until such time as we have a future policy laying out the grounds under which we look at those review mechanisms. Bit of an oddity within the system, but there we go. We've tried to stick review mechanisms onto nil provisions in the past and have been unable to defend that on appeal because of that national guidance. So it's a little bit skewed towards developers, unfortunately, on that basis. But nevertheless, national guidance is clear where there is clear viability evidence, which we have received and independently verified. We cannot require affordable housing to be provided.
Is that this supplementary? Is that still the case, even though the applicant had mentioned in negotiations with a RSL, which is undoubtedly a better way of a developer dealing with the whole development of affordable housing than just trying to do it themselves?
Yes, unfortunately so. So there is standard methods pretty much now using the RICS handbooks on how one assesses it clearly, and a different approach, a build-to-rent approach, an RSL with a greater access to funding from Homes England may have a different scheme of viability. Neither of those are part of this scheme. This is a build for dispose residential scheme without an RSL partner, and consequently national guidance does unfortunately guide us that we can't require affordable housing in this case.
Colleagues, any other questions for Ian before we move on to comments? And comments? Councillor New.
Thank you, Chair. And yeah, I mean, I suppose really it's not really any surprise that we're seeing tall buildings coming through. It does always feel like in Portsmouth the only way is up to quote Yaz on the plastic population, which I know that you would enjoy, Chair. Actually, just off the back of Councillor Smythe's comments, and which I agree with her, 7.39 does actually address that, I think, the detail of the requirements. And I do know that this is only outline. So on the whole, I support this, and I think that, you know, bringing 176 new dwellings, circa, to the city centre on what is currently a bit of an eyesore old site and an area that does need regeneration. And actually, we've already seen some very impressive high buildings or tall buildings being built there. I think it's quite welcome, so I'd look forward to seeing the further plans that will be presented to the committee at a later date, but I support this.
Thank
I'll
you.
second that. Oh, sorry.
Oh, Councillor Smith first.
I would just, sorry, Chair, I would second Councillor Rodney's comments.
Thank you. And Councillor Smythe?
No, I was going to do the same.
Okay. Any other comments? Councillor Mason.
I certainly also welcome this because it is, I think, looking at the developments which we have in pipeline for the city centre, this is about the right size, the right height. It is not excessively high, but it matches some of the heights which we have seen elsewhere in the city. So I am quite happy to see this go forward. I look forward to seeing the detailed designs.
Thank you. Ian, any news from your officers?
Those numbers are about right, is what they managed to come back with. It would take a while to do the calculation through that. As I say, it becomes a bit of a moot point, as we can't require it anyway, but it would be a proportion of 30% of 176.
Okay, any other comments? Shall I move the officer's recommendation? Anybody want a second? Councillor Smith. Okay, unless there is any other views, shall we go to the vote? Those in favour?
It's unanimously in favour.
Thank you, that's done. First bit. Second application. Oh, sorry.
I'll just present it quickly. This is the other half of the site. The currently taller part would become the smaller part, the existing publicly fronting post office section. You can see just about, apologies, that's quite small, but you've got a hotel reception on the southern end of the site, and then the northern areas of it would be the retained post office and the associated activities with that, and obviously all the back office space for the hotel mixed into that as well. Above it, hotel rooms, 200 hotel rooms of varying size. That number is delivered by the addition of, it's hard to see on this drawing, 2 additional stories on top of the building, as well as the whole building clad, refaced and improved upon with a majority of, I think probably the best image there, with some brickwork render and alternative facading around the building to provide both interest at that lower 2 levels and obviously to support that additional mass on those upper levels. Some detailed breakdown of how the building will be stepped to ensure that it creates an attractive frontage, which will be an active frontage, a hotel reception and the post office as you go around that western elevation. As I say, a relatively straightforward application, 2 additional stories, retained post office, new hotel lobby, and delivered as a standalone full application on the western side of this site, all appropriate, of course, for a town centre location, with recommendation consequently for approval, subject to the SMAT, which contains 2 additional letters, which I think are fairly self-explanatory, some clarification around the biodiversity. We thought that could have been a bit clearer in the report, and the additional highway conditions that were referenced in the report but were omitted from the final recommendation detailed within that SMAT submission. Other than that, very happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Anything in addition to the previous deputation?
Yeah, I'll keep it very brief. I won't go over old ground. In respect of the hotel proposal, it was submitted at the same time as the residential application, so it has been in for 3 years as well, and the applicant during this time has worked proactively with officers over that time to make changes again in response to feedback to refine the appearance of the proposal. The proposal, as Ian mentioned, is to strip back this part of the existing building to the structure and to reclad it, to modernise it and lift its appearance, which we consider will significantly enhance the street scene versus what's there at the moment. And the inclusion of a new hotel entrance, lobby and cafe at ground floor level will activate the frontage of the building to the street. And at the moment, a large part of the building at the street level is blank brick facade. Important to note that the public post office and associated ground floor space is retained as part of the development. The hotel will deliver direct local employment opportunities through its operation and management, and will contribute to the vitality of the city centre, hopefully adding more tourism and visitor accommodation offer. The submitted energy report confirms that 25% reduction in carbon emissions would be achieved compared with the existing building, which is well above the 10% requirement. And this is achieved through enhancements to the building fabric, glazing, and the inclusion of an air source heat pump for space and water heating. As with the residential application, there were no statutory technical objections to the application, and the application is compliant with local and national planning policy. I'll leave it there. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Adam.
Thank you, Chair. Just really to reiterate what Tom has already gone over. Hotel schemes of this nature deliver significantly to the local economy, both in terms of direct jobs within the operation, but also to the wider supply chain in the wider Portsmouth area. So we think that this scheme delivers both economically, but also in a wider sense to Portsmouth businesses. We've been working with a number of significant international hotel brand investors, and we continue to go through that. I think it's important to mention, so that members are aware, the post office counter at ground floor, as its existing operation, remains. So there is no effect to no detrimental effect to the public in terms of the post office operation, but the rest of the building is to be converted. It's a very, very solid, very well built concrete frame, and comfortably takes the two additional floors through our engineering studies. But we look forward to again driving this forward. But again, an important scheme for the visitor economy of Portsmouth City Centre. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions, members? Okay. Comments?
I'd like to propose we go to the vote on this.
Okay. Councillor Smythes, moving the recommendation?
No, I had just one question.
Okay.
I note that there is no parking. I agree this is a city centre site, but what we are doing is producing a hotel. People will be coming to the hotel and leaving from the hotel. What is the extent of available parking provision for those who will be arriving by vehicle in the vicinity?
I was going to put an image on screen, but it's pretty vague, so I won't. Obviously, in Slindon Street itself, which is a fairly low-trafficked street, because it obviously goes around the site, the applicant has suggested a drop-off area be identified, and obviously appropriate conditions, additional highway conditions around traffic regulation orders, as well as some minor highway improvements, are in the SMAT. Apologies, they weren't in the development. But yes, there is a space along Slindon Street where drop-off, whether people are choosing to drop off their bags and family members and then go to park in a alternative parking location in the city, or taxis can drop off, is proposed in that space. There is no parking provided in the city, and obviously that's leaning in, if you will, to LTP4's overall strategy for reducing parking in a sustainable location. Like a lot of city centre hotels, especially in close proximity to stations as this one is, the presumption is overall that it's a car-free development, though there are obviously both PCC and private car parking provisions elsewhere in the city, which may or may not, by a future hotel operator, be used as support for this business.
Okay. So we have a Councillor Smythe has moved the officer's recommendations. Anybody else? Councillor Smythe.
Thank you. I had another question about paragraph 651 about mitigation from nitrates. This is a different way of doing it than we've read about before, and I would like a little bit of an explanation about how it works.
Certainly. So, as members know, all new overnight stays require mitigation for nitrates, i.e. excess nutrients into soil and waters. So that's all new dwellings and hotels. Obviously, it's a much smaller number for hotels, compared to a similar number of flats, because there's less occupancy in hotels. What we're seeing, and this is I think what Councillor Smythe is referring to, is the new approach, which is moving away from using the bank of credits that PCC created through retrofitting properties that we own, improving their wastewater outputs. That was always a limited offer. There's only so many toilets we can fit that are low flush, etc. Now moving towards the second interim mitigation strategy, which was endorsed by I can't remember if it was Cabinet or full council some time ago, which is utilising a land-based provision of nitrate credits. So rather than reducing the amount of nutrient coming through wastewater through domestic toilets in council houses, which is largely what the previous scheme was doing, we're now creating credits through reduction of nitrate deposition on agricultural land elsewhere in the same water catchment. It's actually over on the Isle of Wight, and that's land that is being managed by the Hampshire and Isle of Wildlife Trust, and we've entered into agreements with them to deliver the necessary legal mechanisms. But individual developers, and this is one of them, has then entered into a specific agreement with the Wildlife Trust to effectively have a part of a farm that's existing on the Isle of Wight being reduced its nitrate output, and there's now positive covenants that we can enforce through our legal powers in partnership with the Wildlife Trust and the Isle of Wight Council to ensure that that land has less nitrate deposited in it, and thus less nitrate washing into the soil and waters. So it's a different pathway of nitrate that we've managed to tackle and reduce, and there's consequently additional partners involved in it. But this is one, and members will see several others, I'm sure, of that new mechanism of creating a reduced nitrate burden on soil and waters by using a series of legal agreements that we have created, and then obviously the additional legal agreement that the developer specifically enters into with the Hampshire and Wildlife Trust as the manager of this land elsewhere in the soil and water catchment area.
Okay, thank you. We have a proposal. Any other questions, comments? I shall second the proposal. And unless there are any other views, shall we move to the vote? Those in favour?
It's unanimous approval.
Thank you. Okay, we move on. Military Road. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Symes. Military Road. Yeah.
Military Road. This is a household extension, the construction of a mansard roof on top of an existing building. There's number 43, corner of Military Road and Firgrove Crescent. Largely fills its plot, as you can see, is an unusual configuration of buildings within its plot. Also a slightly unusual building. You can see from the upper images, that's the existing, it's a flat roof building, and they're proposing to put a flat roof, mansard roof, on top of it to provide the additional floor space for this household. That's it from the other angle. Probably better if I could just take you through to some. Yeah, there you go. So it is already an unusual design. It's pretty much the only flat roof in the area. A mixture of hips and gables, but a lot of them similar to the building you can see adjacent to it here. That's a different angle. You can see, again, the hips and gables down at Firgrove. So it is an anomaly within the street scene. Consequently, adding the mansard roof, which is, again, not particularly common feature, I haven't been able to identify another one, is equally anomalous, but that's the point. It's equally anomalous. It's no more harmful to the character and the homogeneity that may form part of that character than the existing flat roof building is. Officers have carefully looked at the opportunities for overlooking from the new additional windows within the mansards, which are largely replicating those that already exist on the first floor, and are satisfied that that additional overlooking does not result in any material harm to warrant the refusal of this household extension. Just to turn to the SMAT, we have a couple of late letters in there reported on the SMAT, just to bring that to members' attention. One specific point that's raised in a number of local concerns is that this is an extension that will, in the future, allow the conversion of this dwelling into an alternative use, an HMO use. Clearly, I'm not saying that won't happen, but that will require plan permission to change from a C3 dwelling to an HMO of however many bedrooms, and the judgment of whether or not that would be acceptable can be made at that time when application is applied for. It can't be made now when that is not what's being sought. This is being sought as a extension, a household extension, by adding a mansard roof to this corner flat roof building, which is deemed to be acceptable on its own merits. I think we have a deputation on it. Other than that, happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Mr. Kenston.
It's got me down here as a deputation, but that is an administrative error. However, I'm more happy to read out Mo Horswell's deputation. She's not here today.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Simpson. So, Mr. Kenston first, and then we'll move on to...
Hello. Could I just have one more photo too? Is that who should I pass around to?
Yeah, absolutely. If you want to... George, if you can grab them.
It's just a photo out the front of my lounge, my neighbour's lounge, which is very similar to where we are. But
okay, thank you. So you have 6 minutes.
I'm here to... Well, my name's Peter Kenniston from 29 Firgrove Crescent, so it's the house on the corner you can see in the picture behind the 20 sign. I'm here to outline my objections to this planning application and the shortfalls I've seen in this report. The proposed extension will directly block sunlight and light from my property and my neighbour's property at number 30 Firgrove Crescent. It will also have an impact on a number of the other properties on the south side of Military Road, so it will block where the sun comes over the house in the morning in the springtime. The spring sun rises directly behind number 43 Military Road, so both our front bedroom and our lounge benefit from early morning sunshine and light. The report mentions 2 properties and how the proposed extension will not affect the light to these properties. One property, number 28 Firgrove Crescent, is to the north of 43 Military Road, and the other property, 45 Military Road, is to the east of Military Road. The report concludes there is no loss of light to these properties, but this is not really surprising, seeing as the sun rises in the east, sets in the west, and following a southerly arc, direct sunlight would not affect these properties. 29 and 30 Firgrove Crescent sit directly west of 43 Military Road, where sunlight and light will be blocked by this extension during early morning in the spring. Also, in the report, it mentions that these properties directly adjacent to 43 are not affected by what they can see, but they're actually too close to the property. If you look from the photo I've just passed around where my lounge is, it's going to literally block out our view of the tree line and the skyline. The report makes no mention of this fact of the skyline and the tree line, and I find it strange why it didn't apply the same sort of criteria to our properties as it did to those adjacent. Light and sunlight both have a positive effect on mental health and well-being, something the report is not taken into consideration. The report is only reporting on where there is no loss of light. We at number 29 and 30 in parts of Military Road would lose the skyline and tree line we currently have, which is something that benefits these properties greatly. Again, it's not deemed important enough for consideration in this report. The other concerns I have is the planned future use as an HMO. This future use was explained to me by Mr Moon in April 22, so it's something I can't ignore because he stood in front of his house and explained exactly what he wanted to do and who he wanted in there. There are a large number of objections clearly show the same concerns on the neighbourhood with regards to this property being turned into an HMO. Creating a building not in keeping with the local area as there are no other 3-storey buildings there. It is a distinctive property, but I don't think the mansard roof is going to add anything to it. It will take away from what it is. A nice looking building now, it will not make it look any better. It will make it look worse. There's been a big lack of communication to residents, so everything's been a bit of a rush. And most of the residents who are affected weren't informed. And this is also highlighted in the objections you can see in the online. The planning application and this report show a lack of consideration for the residents of Fairgrove Crescent and Military Road. Not enough consideration has been given to the impact this extension will have on the local area and the people living here. It seems to me that one man's financial gain is more important than the well-being of the residents of Fairgrove Crescent and Military Road, and the changes to the outlook for the residents is not deemed more positive than a financial gain to one man. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kenniston. Councillor Simpson, if you'd like to give
So I'm
a
reading
deputation on behalf of your resident.
On behalf of Mo as well. Since finding out their amended plans have been submitted to PCC Planning Department from the owners of 43 Military Road, I have spoken to a number of local residents in both Military Road and Fairgrove Crescent. Everyone is unhappy with the proposed extension, and the fact that the owner has made it known that the changes are being made so that the house can be an HMO. The local residents object to the plans for the following reasons. 1, the proposed changes will make the building stand out from all surrounding properties and be totally out of character for the area. 2, it will be an invasion of privacy for neighbouring properties. 3, I completely understand the concerns expressed by 29 and 30 Fairgrove Crescent, looking at their loss of daylight, sunlight, treetops views. There will also be reduced lighting for several neighbourhood properties. This should be taken into consideration. 4, parking at this end of Military Road is horrendous, causing more and more residents to take over and pave their front gardens for parking. These parking issues also spill over into Fairgrove Crescent, Perone Road and Scott Road. Excuse me a second. Something residents have been talking to their councillors about for a long time. There is a risk of 4+ car owners living at the property should the extension be granted and it become an HMO. 5, this area is a residential area occupied by families and not suitable for HMO developments. There is the potential to increase noise pollution in a generally quiet and peaceful area. 6, permission of an early application was previously refused. What's changed? The local community do not want properties to be developed to bring in HMOs. Please note that Portsmouth City Council has not made us aware of that another application has been submitted. Portsmouth City Council have asked residents to give their views and they will be listened to. Please listen to us. Mo.
Thank you, Councillor Simpson.
Yeah. I'm going to say that into the mic, please, Councillor.
Yes, I've read it for the resident. It's not on my view as it stands.
Okay, one more deputation. Councillor Scott Peter Harris.
Thank you, Chair, and welcome, good luck on your first meeting. I think it's gone well so far. Just out of interest,
the day is early.
It's early, yeah. I mean, you could mess this one up. This application is focused on the PCS 23, which talks about excellent architectural quality in new buildings and changes to buildings and development, which relates, sorry, just my laptop has just nearly died. It relates to obviously the history and protection enhancement of the views and settings of key buildings. I mean, this application is designed to change a building in a road which hasn't had any other changes like this before. And I think Mr. Kennison has already articulated how it's going to affect him and the residents opposite him, and also the residents to the south of Military Road. So I think there is some issues with the application with regard to the mansard roof. I think the neighbours have articulated that well in their application, and I think if you look at the comments, there's over 20 comments on what I would call a simple extension. Well, it's not a simple extension, it's an additional story. So if you go back to the image that was shown up on the screen, if you could possibly do so, I'd be grateful. So if you look at the, further back, thank you. So those are quite what I would call in line with everyone else. This house is going to materially stand out to compare to every other house in that road, And the Portsmouth plan requires a lot of things: the protection of amenity and the provision of good standard of living. I don't think there's going to be a problem with the standard of living. I think the standard of living will be good because of the size of the property. However, it's not going to protect the local amenity. It makes a material change to the area. Once you start doing one, you'll have more follow suit. And I think the image that is shown by Mr. Kennison of his front living room it's already what I would call in his eye line. That is going to completely block out any viewpoint he is going to have and his neighbours are going to have. And if you go further around, similarly, you're going to have some serious issues as well. Once this happens, I think if the application goes through today, the committee is almost giving a green light to say that this is okay. I don't think this is okay. I think the recommendation I think the officers have given is based upon, I think, because they feel it works within planning terms. I think we need to look logically and look at actually you can have significant loss of light and a significant change materially to that area by allowing the application to go ahead. So personally, I would hope that members could look at that, look at this application with an open mind, but also at the same time realising that actually for 20 different representations to come back on what you would call an additional storey and a mansard roof is quite unusual, because there is quite a big feel against this application. But also at the same time, it does make a material change to the area. I do believe it contravenes PCS 23, and I actually believe that you should actually look at potentially refusing the application. I don't really have anything else to add. I hand it over to you to make the right decision.
Thank you, Councillor Peter Harris. Questions, members? Councillor Hugh Mason.
Context. I gather that this is not the only flat-roofed property with that 1930s design in the area. How much of the surrounding area is flat-roofed properties?
Unfortunately, I can't give you a figure, so certainly when we look at the images you can see, and as always when one does a character appraisal, how far away, how close is character judged surrounding this building. You can see from these photographs there is a fairly consistent, not flat roof appearance. Where the other flat roof buildings may be would obviously be a broader assessment and may well start moving outside of the immediate character area that one might want to assess to judge the impact of the site. So this is the junction of Firgrove and Military. Firgrove is a crescent site and so joins Military again. You can see it bending round to the left there to the west, joins over on the western side, and on that similar inset corner there is another flat roof, actually with some odd crenellated parapet appearance. I think that was, and obviously opposite that there's a commercial building that has a flat roof, but other than that it's a relatively series of uniform designs in Firgrove. Military has a number of parapets rather than flat roofs demonstrated in there, as well as more hips rather than gable ends fronting, but this certainly does stand out as a different building. Just for some clarity, if I may, Chair, around that, the idea that once you grant this, that somehow obliges you to grant something else obviously is not true. Every building must be taken on its own merits, so it's the design merits of this one you're looking at, not a notional other flat roof building or other roof addition elsewhere in the area. So I think I would just be cautious to advise members on any point raised regarding this somehow setting or fettering your future decision making for household additions. While I have the mic, if I can just add one more comment. One of the representations that Councillor Simpson read out noted that previous mansard had been refused, and what has changed. To be absolutely clear, members I'm sure will have seen it at one point. 1.3, yes, 2026 to 2006, a planning permission for a mansard was refused. 2008, a planning permission for a mansard was granted. So there's already been a mansard, and it's that one, granted in 2008. That's long expired, and planning is not a precedent system. You must come to your own judgment, but this was deemed to be an acceptable mansard on this site, in this character area, in 2008. So when you compare it to the mansard proposed, different materials, slightly different orientation and window form, but one we feel is equally acceptable, so which obviously to that which the council found acceptable back in 2008.
Thank you. Councillor Smith.
Two questions, Chair. First one, is there anything, picking up on the points that have been made about shadowing, have we got any information about that?
So we don't have a daylight sunlight study. We are satisfied from our assessment that none of the properties would have an unreasonable impact. Yes, it's an extension to the building that may well interrupt both a view and a sunlight path, but that's, of the building and then across the road and then across the frontage into the neighbours. I'm not going to say it doesn't have an impact, but that's an impact that's not considered to be unreasonable. Members will of course recall that the right to a view is not a material planning consideration, so the fact that previously neighbours may have seen over the building at trees and that will now be obstructed by roof form is not a reason to withhold planning permission.
Sorry, just a second. My second question was, there was mention that there's been no other alterations in the road. Is that house built at the same time as all the other houses in the road?
I don't know, to be honest. I would be surprised, to be honest, because it is an unusual configuration as well as an unusual piece of architecture.
Okay. Any comments? Any further questions, sorry, before we go to comments? Councillor Simpson? Comments? Yeah, okay.
Thank you. It's very unusual because even though these built in the 1900s, the area is actually very unique. It has almost like a village feel. If you actually look at Google Images from above, you actually see it surrounded by trees. It's got Fox's Forest to the right, Fox's Forest to the back. It's very unique part of Hilsey, and seeing the, this is very uncharacteristic to the area. I mean, I think one of the residents wants to point out the fact that it will block his light, and you can clearly see from the image that it will block light. So, a study probably should have been done. It's very clear. I don't know if, Ian, have you seen the image that was passed around?
I haven't, but I've been to the site and obviously
yes.
I've been able to observe, so I disagree that it's clear it would block light.
Okay.
But yes.
Well, I've been to the site as well, and I think it's very clear that this is very uncharacteristic to the area. I mean, these are really, as I say, quaint little countryside gardens, like real village feel. And I feel that the fact, even though if it happens or not, it's been clearly made that this is turned into an HMO. I know we're not judging that today, but we've had previous applications where we've approved extensions, and those extensions have then qualified it to be an HMO of a certain size. And I think that's something we should really consider. And I will not be voting for this. I kind of feel that if it wasn't as tall and as uncharacteristic to the area, there would definitely be a consideration, but I think there's just a lot of red flags here that I think we need to consider.
That was a comment rather than a proposal.
Well, I mean, yes, what wording isn't it to refuse?
All right, we'll see how we go. Councillor Ashmore.
Thanks, Chair. I know some of the deputation, or one of the deputations there brought up, it could turn into a HMO, and I know that's not something that's the jurisdiction of this committee. We can't make decisions on that, but there were other things that came up, and the thing that really brought it home is we could talk about loss of light and right to view and everything, but the picture that Mr. Keniston, isn't it, showed around there showed it, putting an extra story on that, I think would be of a deleterious effect if you lived in that property, and that's, it might not be a legal thing or a planning thing that we can look at, but I certainly wouldn't. I'd certainly consider it a complete loss of light, and I'd consider it an infringement on my quiet enjoyment of my property, which is, I think, a material condition of that. So, yeah, I'm of the opinion that would not only affect a neighbouring property's right to enjoy their property, I think that it would, as has been discussed as well, change the landscape of that area out of character. That's my comment.
Thank you, Councillor Ashmore. Of course, it's worth reiterating we're in the business of looking at material planning considerations. For good or ill, that's what we're here to, that's what we're charged with doing here. Any other comments? Councillor Mason.
Whilst I have no objection to the development and the height of it, and coming from Southsea, one wouldn't have. We're so closely packed together. What I don't like is the design. I don't think that the design is suitable. I don't think it fits in with the character of the existing building. And we have to consider design principles, and I don't think that the design is actually sufficiently good to justify our accepting it at this point.
Thank you. Councillor Smythe.
I agree. I think it's a question of design, and it looks so ugly and overbearing from the pictures shown.
Councillor Missing, I've asked you to turn your microphone off. That would be helpful. Thank you. Okay. Any other comments? We've had some comments, but not a proposal from anyone as yet.
Can I suggest, I don't know how to do this, I've never done it before, but can I suggest something that says we can refuse this on the grounds that it will materially change the landscape of the area and disadvantage the neighbours' right to enjoy their property?
Well, we need, if you're going to come up with a proposal, we need some words. I don't know whether Councillor Smythe wants to...
Propose that we use or adapt the reasons given for refusal before on page 82 at point 113.
Page 82, 113. Construction of a new second floor, etc. Kieran, does that work?
The proposed construction of an additional floor at roof level would, by virtue of excessive bulk and its design, represent an overbearing and unneighbourly development, detrimental to the amenities of adjoining occupiers, notably in terms of their outlook and the creation, their outlook, full stop. I propose a refusal
the
on those
question
grounds.
back to you in as much as that you obviously wouldn't want
It's
to be accused
slightly
of...
amended from 113.
Exactly. It's the amendments I think
Kieran,
you might want to
we don't
emphasise.
have conversations between each other. We have conversations through the chair.
Chair, it's a very slight amendment.
Smythe, just to keep things in order.
It's a very slight amendment, Chair, to what we already have had before. I've taken out the... I've put, by virtue of its excessive bulk, cross out in close proximity to other adjoining properties and design. Represent an overbearing and unneighbourly development detrimental to the amenities of adjoining occupiers, notably in terms of their outlook. And we could say, and loss of light. But I think it's quite a distant outlook would be all right. I propose that. Anybody's welcome to amend it if they want.
Thank you. We have a formal proposal.
Officer advice, please, Chair.
Chair, if I may, thank you. Can I be absolutely clear? Are you suggesting, notably in terms of their outlook and loss of light, or just outlook?
I would be happy with. I mean, they're in a way similar and overlapping those things.
I would. I mean, obviously they can overlap. I think to suggest that there is a loss of light would be to suggest that, in your judgment, despite the separation between the two buildings, I note you have removed the word close proximity. So I'm guessing it is an outlook, i.e., that which they can see.
That is what I'm most concerned about.
So that.
But others, of course, are free to amend that.
Yes, absolutely. So that's perfectly clear. And obviously, for members' reference, should they need it, that would then, one assumes the conclusion is that would be contrary to policy PCS 23 of the Portsmouth Plan and relevant guidance.
Thank you. We do have a formal proposal on the table. Any seconded? Councillor Simpson. Any other views? Sorry, George, do you?
All I was going to say is that we need to put in there somewhere that it's contrary to planning policy PCS 23, which is what Ian eventually got round to.
Okay, so we have a form of words. Are you happy with that, Kieran?
Ian, do you just want to give a read back on that for clarity?
Yep, so if members wish, through your chair, the proposed construction of an additional floor at roof level would, by virtue of this excessive bulk, represent an overbearing and unneighbourly development, detrimental to the amenities of adjoining occupiers, notably in terms of their outlook, and is thus considered contrary to policy PCS 23 of the Portsmouth Plan 2012.
I wanted to put excessive bulk and design.
Apologies, I did write that, then didn't read it. Yes, excessive bulk and design represent an overbearing and unneighbourly development.
Okay. A formal proposal, seconder. Anything else before we move towards the vote? Okay. Those for the proposal. Councillor Smythe's proposal.
So that's a unanimous passing of the motion, resulting in refusal of planning permission.
Okay. Planning permission has been refused. Okay. Lombard Court.
Thank you. 1 to 40 Lombard Court. This is a block of flats in the Old Portsmouth Conservation Area. You can see it marked with an X on that image. Members may recall earlier this year plan permission was granted by this committee for the formation of 2 roof terraces, either end of the 2 X's of the building, and as you'd imagine, roof terrace did require a perimeter balustrade for safety purposes. The applicant at the time proposed that that balustrade be of galvanised steel. This committee decided to impose an additional condition to say it shouldn't be a galvanised steel but should instead be finished in a black colour. The applicant has come back and said, oh, actually, no, we'd rather do the galvanised steel, thank you very much, and has invited us to vary the plan permission so that they can continue with the galvanised steel design. Officers are satisfied in light of the fact that very little of this balustrade will be visible at all over the parapet of the existing mansard form of this building, and in truth galvanised steel is probably less visually intrusive than a stark black colour. The galvanised steel is an appropriate material that the applicant wishes to use for the site and would have no detrimental harm to the conservation area, the building, or amenity, or other matters of material planning consideration. And consequently, officers are happy to recommend the variation of condition as described in the application. We have nothing on the SMAT and no deputations for this item.
Thank you. Thank you. Members, any questions on the application? Any comments?
I'd move that motion that's just been said by Ian, really. I think I was at the last when that came up and I didn't really think that the change, you're not going to see it that much, so I don't think there's a big thing personally. That's my proposal.
I have similar recollections. Councillor Fielding.
I was just going to say it's a straightforward application. Happy to second what Councillor Smith said.
Okay. Any other inputs? Okay, so we've got a proposal and a seconder to the vote. In favour?
It's unanimously approved.
If only everything were that straightforward in life, generally. Okay, on to the last one. Bedhampton Road.
Thank you. 55 Bedhampton Road. You can't do a planning committee without an HMO, so this is your HMO for today. This is a change of use from a dwelling house C3 into a HMO showing 6 bedrooms. That's it there in the middle of Bedhampton Road. Middle of this image you can see on screen. There is one other HMO in the area, meaning this conversion would be well below the 10%, 2 point something, top of my head, if I can find it. It's in here somewhere. 2.24% at paragraph 8.6 HMO mix under your mixed and balanced communities policy, so acceptable mix on that basis. The scheme, like a lot of these conversions, does involve alterations to the dwelling under permitted development. so they would be undertaken to provide rear additions and alterations to the roof, thus providing them minimum size necessary to meet your size standards as prescribed by private sector housing and your SPD. However, the kitchen dining space, which you can see on the far left of this image, there is a very narrow space, somewhat eaten into by the doorway and foot of the stairs, as they make some of that space less usable than it might be. And it is an absolute minimum, 22.5, with all the bedrooms being over 10 square metres. Officers are therefore concerned that the overall living environment created, while technically meeting your SPD, as I've told members many times, including in this meeting, planning is not a numbers game, that number doesn't quite do it for officers. We do note that, however, the living dining room at 22.5 metres is supplemented by a 10-metre lounge, as an additional amenity above and beyond what the SPD would require. And when we factor that into the overall living quality for the future occupiers of this HMO, having 22.5, albeit a little bit, will be eaten into by the layout of that space. In addition to a 10-metre lounge, we're satisfied that those two things together do make an acceptable living environment, and consequently planning permission is recommended to be approved, subject to a condition that living room is retained as a living room and isn't in the future converted to a bedroom, which may well have been the applicant's intent. So you would end up with 6 bedrooms, a 22.5 living dining room and a 10-metre separate lounge, which, when we add all together, is, we feel, a more than satisfactory living environment for an HMO of this size, and fully complies, therefore, with your policy and guidance. I say fully complies, I will honestly say one of the bathrooms is a little bit shy on the first floor. If members have any concerns about that, we can obviously look at a condition, but otherwise fully complies with your policies.
Thank you. We've lost Mr. Hill, who was down to give a deputation. He's not here, so we can't do that. Members, questions? Comments? Yep.
I don't normally need one of these anyway, but could you reiterate the concerns about the living space? Because you said it was very narrow. I mean, was it in the officer's opinion that that was probably a bit too, you know, I mean, because I know that these, you know, the, what do they call, they're almost like corridors essentially to get there. I mean, I know that comes under the spacing, but did the officers feel that that was adequate enough for the application?
No, otherwise we wouldn't have imposed, suggested the imposition of the additional condition. So what you've got is this corridor here, which obviously you've got some of this area eaten into by a door, which is therefore unusable on that basis, and obviously this stairwell oversailing part of what otherwise would have been cupboards or something to make up a kitchen. So if you were to remove those two areas from the footprint, it would drop just below 22.5 metres. If one did planning by numbers, therefore it doesn't comply with 22.5 as a minimum standard. So when we look at it as a whole, and then obviously the fact that that layout of having the illustration, it's not the only way they could do it, of course, but the illustration of this space here in this corridor coming down, either it's going to be a kitchen with counters along one side, or you could maybe try and get a seating in there, but wouldn't be a particularly comfortable living environment. The utility of this end of the combined living space is relatively minimal, and when we apply our professional judgment over the quality of the living environment, that's what the policy says, though, to have a good quality living environment. We don't think that's a particularly good provision. Consequently, by providing some additional space, so you're not having to sit in there, and you'll just be very much using this as a utility space, cooking and eating, because you've got an additional lounge to recreate in. We're satisfied that in combination that is a reasonable living environment, but to guarantee that that is the case, a condition is being suggested so that that lounge, which you can see here, would be retained as a lounge. Clearly, this is a development that's being was when we went last, still being undertaken. It may well be that the applicant chooses not to build that internal wall and combines it all into one space, and it's a different layout. I think that will be a better design, but even with these approved plans, that is an acceptable design to have a galley kitchen opening out onto a larger dining area, which goes onto the garden, and a separate living space that not only exceeds your space standards, but also in qualitative assessment by planning officers makes a reasonable living environment for the future occupiers.
So essentially, if this was to be approved, but it could come with a recommendation, even though it does meet it, they could come with a recommendation that, if, as you've just pointed out, that if they didn't build the false wall, it would be a better space.
One could impose an informative elevation. I'd say I would be loath to do so because I'd want to have a look at the orientation and spaces, etc., which private sector housing is far better to deal with than we are as a planning committee on the fly. Yeah.
Did you want to pursue the informative? Or are you happy? Okay. Any other comments?
I understand the point made about the bathroom, but it does give people in the house the opportunity to have a bath rather than just a shower. So I think that's probably worth the compromise on size there. And if we are at that stage, are we at comment stage yet?
Why not?
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to move towards approval of this, given that it does meet our standards, and I particularly welcome the additional condition, which means that we won't be faced with a application for development which includes converts the living room into a further bedroom. So, subject to those two those conditions, more than two, several conditions, but particularly valuing the last one about retention of the living room, I propose that we accepted the report and approved the application.
Thank you.
Chair.
Councillor Smith?
I would second that, Chair.
You're seconding. Councillor Fielding?
I was just going to make the comment that obviously they can apply to have the condition removed if they so wished, and therefore allow them to apply for a sui generis on the property in the future. But I'm generally happy with the condition as written by there. Do we need to include anything about the zone protection area as well, or is that not applicable in this instance?
So the adopted standard that we have within our local guidance is because an HMO 6-bedroom is a similar scale to that which a dwelling house would have, that there aren't additional space. If they applied for a 9-10-bed HMO, that would be likely additional people, but a C3 to 6-bed HMO isn't an additional one that requires, under our scoping, a nitrate contribution.
Okay. Okay, we've got a proposal and a seconder. If there is nothing else from anyone else, shall we move to the vote? Those in favour?
Six in favour.
Against?
One against.
And abstentions?
And one.
Thank you. Planning permission is granted. Thank you. There's one further piece of business. The committee dates for 23, 24 have been agreed and are in item 10 of the report. I think that is it. I think probably all that's left for me to say is happy Christmas to everyone. See you in the new year, and I'll close the meeting at 13:28.